Our new story begins with a girl telling her father that he can't marry her off to that old man. We learn that this girl is the eldest daughter of the Marquis, and her name is Marietta. At this time, the father is trying to calm his daughter, and calling her dear, asking her to calm down and sit in her seat. In response, the girl got even more angry and asked about Marquis. How can she calm down? She emphasizes that it's because she can't bear a day of being his wife, at which point tears of despair appear in the girl's eyes, immediately after which she begins to cry even harder, realizing her powerlessness. Seeing all the suffering of his daughter, father says that she should not worry, because he will find a way to prevent their marriage. We also learn that this man's name is Marquis Marktrite. Then the Marquis's second son, Alfred, intervenes in their conversation, drawing attention to himself and asking his father if Count Juan had warned him that if his father ignored the offer this time, he would throw them out on the street. Suddenly, some girl enters the same room. She immediately asks Marquis how much they owe, and then we find out that this girl is Marquis's second daughter named Blanche. Hearing his daughter, the Marquis turns to her and does not answer anything, just as if thinking about something, at which point the eldest of the daughters immediately jumps up from her seat and, turning to Blanche, asks her, "Does she really think that she will marry for money?" Then Blanche, with her eyes downcast, says that what her sister understood is not what she meant. Then the Marquis interrupts the argument between his daughters and says that the interest is about half of the principal. When Blanche heard about it, she was very surprised and said that if they didn't pay the debt by the end of the month, it could turn out to be quite disastrous for their family. Then the very calm Marquis said that there was a way to pay off the debt. He said that if they sold the mansion and paid the rest of the debt, they could get out of debt. Of course, hearing this, the eldest daughter was even more surprised. She tells her father that he can't do that, because if he does, they will look like a ruined noble family, while the younger son tries to get attention and coughs to be noticed. But his attempts are not successful, because the older sister, again with tears in her eyes, says that if they sell the mansion and look like a ruined noble family, she will not be able to become a princess because of too bad reputation. Hearing these words, Marquis apologizes to Marietta and says that in this situation and becoming a princess will be almost impossible. At this time, he even looks a little sad. But then his daughter says it's all wrong. After all, she is already a princess, according to her last month in the Great Temple, the third prince, and she secretly played a wedding. She also emphasizes that they have sworn an oath before God, so that not even the king can break that oath. Looking directly at her father, she asks if he understands what that means. Hearing this, the Marquis was speechless. Then the younger brother got into their conversation and told his sister that he was very happy for her. But he asked why she had kept it a secret for so long. Then, daring to answer, the girl said that it was all the prince's will. She also says that according to the prince, if she gets pregnant, His Majesty will have no other choice but to bless their marriage. Then all her dreams of becoming a princess are interrupted by her younger sister. She informs her sister that the third prince already has a bride, then fully convinced of her love with the prince. Marietta asks her sister if it's true. She asks. This is because she doesn't understand anything. Naturally, Marietta immediately tells her sister that the prince will definitely break off this engagement. Hearing these words, her younger sister is naturally very surprised. But the girl says that there is still no chance of His Majesty approving the marriage. Then Marietta tells her sister that she has come up with the perfect solution. Naturally, everyone was shocked, including Marquis and her younger brother. They were wondering what their sister had come up with. Then Marietta decided to come clean and asked her father if it was true that right now their family couldn't pay off their debts, and that's why she was being sold as a bride. She also notices that on top of all this, Don Juan is her fiancé and an old man with thick gray hair, and she is the most beautiful woman in the empire. So she looks directly at her sister and asks why her father should not send their sister Blanche instead of her, at which time she points her finger at her sister, who clearly did not expect this turn of events. Blanche, hearing her sister's proposal, remained in incredible shock. The girl even opened her mouth, thereby showing how much she could not expect to see her sister's reaction. Marietta approached her. She asked Blanche to listen to her for a while, and then the older sister said that the girls were twins, and that was why her sister would be able to marry him without much suspicion. At this point, she also says that after the girl marries the Count, she will poison him immediately after the first wedding night, thus ridding herself of the pesky Juan. According to her, Joan's reputation is so bad that he has made a lot of enemies. Marietta proposes to use it in their favor. And then, according to her, Blanche will remain an incredibly rich widow. But the younger sister was not surprised by this plan. She started crying very hard and said that she did not agree to do any of the above mentioned by her sister. Then the father, looking at his youngest daughter, interrupts her tears. He asked her not to be so angry and help save her sister from marrying the hated Juan. At this point, the younger brother also joined in the entreaties on the part of the father, turning to Blanche. He asked her to bear with him a little to save the situation of their family. At that moment, Blanche looked at her family and realized that there was definitely something wrong with them all. She didn't think that they would ever tell her to kill someone. Yet now all of her family members were agitating to kill Don Juan. At that moment, the girl thinks that if she is caught trying to poison him, it will be impossible for her to cover herself from such a sin. She even sees a picture of Juan attacking her when she realizes that she wants to kill him. Finally, the girl stopped and stopped crying. Then, looking at her family members, she asked why she had to do it alone, since her older sister would definitely do it much better. Then Marietta suddenly slapped her younger sister with a slap. From so strong a blow, Blanche fell to the ground, not even able to help. At this moment, the eldest daughter of Marquis looked very angry. Also, looking at her dumpy little sister, Marietta calls her a selfish bitch, her green eyes seemingly filled with anger and something indescribable. At this point, Blanche was lying on the ground. She reached for her cane to get up from the floor, at which time her father intervenes in their conflict, and turning to Blanche, he asks her how dare she speak like that. After all, Marietta, unlike her, will become a princess. According to him, His Majesty would never recognize her if she became a mongrel, at which point her brother grabbed the girl's cane, and as if he wanted to hand the cane to her to get up. But instead of giving the cane to his sister and helping her to get up from the floor, the boy just takes the cane himself and says that his father is right in his statements. According to the boy, all the problems will be solved by the sacrifice of his older sister Blanche. Immediately afterwards, he gives his sister the cane, at which point the protagonist, who is lying on the floor, takes the cane in her hands and, still crying as if to reflect on the words of her family. Then Marquis begins to pour oil on the fire and tells his youngest daughter that he has taken care of her so far. He remarks that he has been doing this, even though the girl is disabled. Looking directly at his daughter, Marquis asks that she not betray her family, at which point the protagonist wonders if this is how it has always been. According to her, the family she lives in has always considered her defect a disgrace. It turns out even the family photos that were in their mansion expressed the Marquis family's contempt for their youngest daughter. Also, according to the main character, she had no choice but to tolerate this bullying, very hurtful behavior on herself all her life. And all of this was happening because she realized that if she didn't tolerate it, she would no longer be considered a good child. And she also realized that she had to back off, even though she wanted to get angry and cry. The girl thinks that if she doesn't act like a good person, she will be completely useless to her family. At that moment in time, the protagonist was crying in her bed, but it was all just memories, and we are transported back. Then the girl realized that nevertheless what her family was now asking for was too great a concession, which is why Blanche says she would rather die than marry Count Don Juan. Naturally, when the Count heard these words from his youngest daughter, he was very much surprised. But his elder sister calmed him down and told him that these were just words from her sister, which were not due to anything. Also, the older sister says that of course, in her opinion, Blanche is not going to die now. Hearing these words, Blanche is speechless, while her face shows the redness of her sister's slap. All these words and situations made Blanche very angry. Again, starting to cry, the girl asks her family if they were aware, and if they knew how hard it was for her all this time. Naturally, Marietta, along with her father, do not answer anything to the younger of the sisters. They both just started to mock a little at her sad words about her hard fate. The smiling girl said it was all just fine, and she was ready to marry the very Count everyone hated. Naturally, upon hearing these words, her family began to rejoice. Her father even wished that the girl would be blessed by God. Her brother congratulated her on her marriage, and her sister simply thanked her for taking on this burden. But suddenly, after the moment of joy, the girl's brother was very much surprised by her unusual act. It turns out the protagonist has already left the window, and with the words about the count began to jump out, thereby showing the seriousness of his words. Jumping out of the window, Blanche says that the count will greet his bride. At this point, the protagonist has already fallen from a high floor, while she noticed that the count will greet his bride, who became a corpse. Dear friends, and if you want to see the next part of this story, then be sure to subscribe to the channel and do not forget to click on the bell, when under this video will be 5,000 likes or 40,000 views. And I will definitely do for you the next part because this manga has 100 chapters that I can recount. Then around the falling Blanche, everything seemed to change. As if it had disappeared, even the house from which she had jumped to commit the terrible deed had disappeared. Suddenly, right after that, the girl, who is already barefoot, runs somewhere. On her face, you can see that she is very much surprised by what she sees. It turned out that she saw that she was behind some kind of bars, imprisoned somewhere. And immediately after that, the girl lowered her gaze down and saw that there was some kind of thick chain near her feet. When she looked where the chain leads, she saw a guy who was in chains. He was kneeling in front of the protagonist, and he looked pretty shabby. His clothes looked like they were covered with cuts, but the guy didn't have any injuries on him. Then the guy also raised his gaze and looked directly at the girl. We can notice that he has very beautiful, shiny blue eyes, but his face looks like he was beaten up. At this point, he looks pretty haggard, which naturally leaves an indelible mark on the protagonist. The girl just keeps looking at this guy with amazement. Then she began to smile a little after thinking about something. The girl said that she knew who this young man was, and that now everything was clear. At this point, the protagonist just kept standing in front of the guy and gawking at him. Naturally, he in return did the same, and they just looked at each other with fascination. Suddenly, the girl also realized what kind of place it was. At this point, the girl's memories seem to be cut short, and she opens her eyes in a bed that looks nothing like a prison, and she seems to be thinking about something else. After looking around, the protagonist realizes that the place she is in is indeed Blanche's bedroom, but she has also begun to realize that this place is the world within the game. The girl even started to see the interface of the game she was in. Turns out it's all because she's in a game in which she was a developer in another world. Also, we learn that this game is called Anastasia's Fluttering Heart. According to the main character herself, the game in which she was the developer is a dating simulator. That said, she now realizes that she is a character whose name is Blanche, meaning she is not Anastasia, much less a character on the list for possible dates. The girl realizes that she has been reborn in this world in the body of Pierre's younger sister, a character who may have a date, and who is one of the target male characters. At this time, we see the game card of the main character. It turns out she is the second younger sister of Pierre, who stutters yes, and also has a shy character. The protagonist realizes that, simply put, she is just a minor character that gives Pierre's story some depth. While she realizes that in the original game, however, she didn't have any problems with her legs. Then she began to think about everything that was going on, and suddenly one of the maids knocked on her door. Turning to her milady, the maid looked at the girl with surprise and said that at last she was awake. At this point, the maid also emphasizes that Blanche can't even imagine how much she was worried. It turns out the maid's name is Fleur. With that, the protagonist looked directly at Fleur. Then she got a notification from the system that said Fleur was disappointed with her recovery as well. But the girl did not seem to mind this and asked the maid if she could give her some water. And hearing these words, the maid was even more surprised, for she had noticed that her lady did not stammer at all. Pouring water for her mistress, the maid says that it was probably all thanks to the priest who cured all the wounds the girl had. At that, smiling a little, Fleur also says that the priest said that the girl will not be able to walk for the rest of her life. Immediately after that, the maid comes to Blanche and, bringing her a glass of water, asks how the girl feels. Then, taking the glass of water in her hands, the protagonist realized that the water that Fleur gave her was mixed with her saliva, which obviously indicates that the maid has a negative attitude against the girl. Then the protagonist thought that Blanche was a character despised by all the maids. According to her, Blanche could not utter a single word and always walked on thin ice. However, Blanche decides that this will not happen again, and then very angry about what Fleur did to her water, the protagonist looked at the glass in her hand and suddenly spat out all the water along with her maid's saliva right on Fleur's face. Naturally, the maids could not have expected such a reaction from Blanche in any way. Naturally, Fleur was very much surprised and also incredibly indignant that all the water was splashed directly on her face. But Blanche at that moment acted as if she did not care about her maid. Then, looking directly at Fleur, the girl asked the maid to call the head butler to her room, because according to the main character, she needed to talk to him about something. Naturally, the maid immediately obeyed the will of her mistress and called the head butler, who immediately came swiftly to the room of the protagonist. Naturally, the guy immediately went to her bed, and as if happy that the girl finally woke up. But he also notes that he has heard rumors that my lady is a little out of it, as well as the maid Fleur. Then the girl seemed to ignore his words and simply changed the subject to the butler. She asked him if her father still wanted to marry her off to Count Juan instead of her sister. Then, a little looking the other way, the butlers told the protagonist that it is so. But he also said that, but the Marquis pulled some strings saying that everything is fine even if the bride you change, and instead of her sister will be she. According to the head butler, the protagonist no longer has to worry about her sister. But this news doesn't seem to please the protagonist at all, and she remembers that originally she should have died, and then her sister would have married Count Juan. At the same time, she tells the butler that she understands everything. But the girl's thoughts are still with her, and she realizes that as long as she remains alive and unharmed, she does not care about all the incidents. Then the butler greatly rejoiced at the words he heard and informed Blanche that she had made the right choice, immediately after which the butler turned to the maid. Looking directly at Fleur, he told the maid that he thought Lady Blanche was in fine condition. After these words, he immediately orders the maid to quickly prepare some tea for the girl. But then the protagonist intervenes in their dialogue and says that Fleur does not need to do it because it is not necessary. Immediately after that, Blanche tells the maid that she is fired, at which point you can see the surprised face of the maid who was in a perplexed state. Naturally, Fleur turned to the mistress and asked why on earth she had decided to fire her. But then the girl asked the head butler to just look at her body. After she exposed her shoulders, the maid became even more excited, while the head butler just watched in amazement. It turns out that the girl's body was visible spots that look like abrasions and dirt. Immediately after that, she turned to the butler, who is her uncle, and attracted his attention to these details. She asked the butler if he thought that her present condition did not correspond to that of the Count's bride, at which point the protagonist was well aware that she would be able to dismiss Fleur because of these factors. Blanche immediately says that if her maid would wipe her body with a wet towel at least once a day, then things probably wouldn't be so bad, at which point Fleur didn't expect things to turn so badly against her. Naturally, the head butler tries to somehow justify the maid, and tells her that now it will be very difficult to send Fleur out of their mansion. It turns out that all this is because the head butler was well aware that if the public becomes aware that the main character tried to commit suicide, then everything could turn out very badly against her family. Then the main character, as if found a way out of this situation, she looked at her uncle and asked him if the basement of their house was empty for a long time. Having understood the hint from the protagonist, the butler said that he understood her, and immediately said that he would send Fleur there right away. Of course, the maid could not expect something like that, and because of this, she ran up to the bed of the protagonist and looked at the girl with surprise. She asked why her mistress so suddenly talked about something like this, because according to her, the protagonist once said that Fleur is her only friend. Suddenly, hearing these words, the protagonist slapped her maid. Because the slap was quite strong, Fleur immediately fell to the ground, holding her cheek. Naturally, the head butler was also very much surprised by such a harsh reaction from the protagonist. But then the girl decided to justify herself and said that she was not sure what she was saying, but it seems to her that they were never friends throughout the 3 years of Fleur's service. Blanche argues that this girl who is now kneeling before her is only a servant who cannot be her friend. Naturally, Fleur was puzzled when she heard these words from her mistress. She immediately guessed that the girl had changed a lot, but it was too late. because the other two butlers were holding her hand to escort the girl to the basement of their house. Realizing that Lady Blanche had changed a lot since the last time they had talked, Fleur even began to cry. At this point, it was unclear whether she was crying because she was going to be put in the basement or because she had realized a mistake. Immediately after the maid was led away from her mistress's room, the girl was left alone with her thoughts as she began to wonder about the game she was in. It turns out she is well aware that the game called Anastasia's Fluttering Heart was created specifically for the main character, whose name is Anastasia. And in order to survive as a secondary character, she needs to do a lot of things. It turns out she realizes that in order to survive in this game, she needs to get as far away from the main character as possible and get closer to the man whose name is not allowed to be spoken. It turns out this man is the villain of this game and the main character of the hidden ending. Apparently, this character has his own beautiful castle, and in the girl's view, he is lying on a mountain of bones, along with his gun in his hands. Then we also learn that this beautiful blue-eyed young man is called Ricardo Giotto di Glass. It becomes obvious that it was him that the girl saw a little earlier. It turns out earlier from her past life, the protagonist was always surrounded by love and care. Then she remembers one moment from her past life. It turns out then in her room came her beloved mom and dad. Mom a little scolded her for the fact that she is a grown-up girl and her room is such a mess. But then the father just laughed and calmed his wife and said that everything is fine because they are not going to live together with their daughter forever. The girl naturally thinks that her parents then were very reliable. Then her boyfriend reassured also her father. The young man told him that the father is very dear to them, so they would not mind at all to stay to live with him forever. Naturally, warm memories of the guy who was always on her side warmed the girl's soul. She also thought about the conversation that was next. Then her father called the guy son-in-law, and also said that their family does not tolerate objections. Of course, then the girl was very surprised and asked her father what he means when he calls her boyfriend son-in-law, because they have not married yet. Further action is transferred to some cafe. A friend of the protagonist asks her why she did not inform them about her difficulties. Of course, the guy who was also at the table banged his fist on the table and said that if the girl has difficulties, she can call them. She should not keep everything in herself. At that moment, she realized that she had everything in her past life, including friends who always cared about her. But everything changed 2 months after the release of the mobile game they had been developing for 4 whole years. Then it was deep evening outside, and the protagonist was heading home. She was chatting with her lover on the phone and told him that she had just now finished working on a mobile game and was now ready to go home. Suddenly, after she took a step on the crosswalk, the girl heard the signal of a truck. Looking around, she saw that at full speed at her rushing big car. Then she lost everything. Friends, family, and also the man she loved. Naturally regaining her memories from her past life of how she was loved and cared for, she realized something. Namely, Blanche realized that in this family no one and never loved her, because their behavior with her cannot be called love, unlike the people who surrounded her in her past life. At this moment in her room enters and younger brother, who is very happy to see his sister. The boy smiled and asked the girl if it is true that she began to speak normally, and realizing that it is true, he told the girl that this is wonderful news. But at the same time, the boy began to tease his sister, and Riley asked her what she can do now, in addition to talking, while he specifies that she still cannot walk. You can see on the face of the boy that he is just mocking his sister. But the protagonist, as if does not even hear her brother, because she is the developer of this game in front of her, as if a map of some ointment appeared. It turns out that she thinks that she can heal his feet with the help of the sacred ointment. It turns out that the sacred ointment gives plus 150 points of health to the hero who used it. It also turned out that this is Mother Florence Findingale, which is a revolution in medicine. In the world of the game, this mother was very quickly gaining popularity as the most effective means of treatment, because just one tube could completely get rid of any injury. But at the same time, looking directly at her brother, the protagonist was well aware that if her family found out about her plans, it would be very difficult for her to escape from this place and finally heal her legs. At this time, the protagonist sees her brother, who says that because of Blanche's rash decision, she has made it very difficult to realize their plan. At this time, the protagonist seems to see the interface of the game and information about her brother. At this point, she guesses that the interface in front of her is a game interface. Despite her brother's icon, she realizes it is a status icon. Realizing this, the protagonist begins to mentally point the mouse at his icon. Then she was surprised to realize that she can click on it through her thoughts. After she did this, the protagonist saw his status and all his characteristics. At this point, the guy, because he did not see anything, just communicated with her and informed Blanche that the doctor who treated her had arrived because of personal ties with her fiancé Juan. But the protagonist still seemed to ignore the words of her brother and just continued to look at his status icon, very much surprised that his power is maximum. She was very curious why his power is so great. At that moment, the protagonist also finally saw her status window. Then she also, through the power of thought, decided to hover her mouse over her status window. And after clicking, she saw her characteristics. When the status of her character was revealed, she saw that the girl was only at level 1, unlike her younger brother who was already at level 32. She also saw that her character's strength was much less than her brother's, and all the other necessary qualities were also at a minimum level. And at this point, she saw that her stress was very much higher than normal. As expected, her status card showed a note that she needed to regain her mental physical strength because her stress level was too high. She also saw that, as expected, Alfred's strength was much greater than hers. Moreover, she is very interested in what is wrong with her moral qualities, because instead of the usual numbers, there are just 4 black squares that denote her morality. Naturally, the main character also wondered what those black squares instead of numbers were. At which point her brother was already very angry and shouted and asked his sister if she was listening to him at all. Realizing that he had made a mistake and introduced himself to his sister's name by yelling at her, the guy made an innocent look again, and changing the subject, said that he was very much worried about her. At this point, the main character noticed the guy, and noticing that he was coughing all the time, she wondered why he was pretending to be sick if he was completely healthy. But then, the protagonist finally understands why her brother is always pretending to be sick. She finally, after a long time, was able to understand what his secret is. It turns out that the protagonist has finally realized the fact that her brother is trying to pretend to be weaker to get the attention that is intended for the protagonist. In this ingenious way, he just makes himself look better than his sister. At this point, she remembers what happened to her earlier. Her father took away the doll she had received as a Christmas present from their late mother. Taking it from his daughter, he gave it to Alfred. Then the Marquise argued that Alfred was still a young boy, and this toy was more suitable for his age. And the father also said that the boy was sick, at which point Alfred was coughing as usual. But looking at his sister, the boy just grinned, realizing that he was able to achieve his goal. At this time, his father just still pressed Blanche and asked her, can't she really give up at least one toy in favor of his brother? At that moment, the main character returns from her memories, but all thanks to the fact that she heard a very loud noise around her. At that moment, it was as if the sky was caving in on her. It turns out it was all because Alfred was yelling again to draw his sister's attention to himself. Then the yelling guy asked what she was thinking because he was still talking to her. Then, seeing that the girl had returned from her thoughts, the boy again began everyone to attract her attention, and also asked her for God's sake to pay a little attention to him, at which moment Blanche simply covered her face with her hand and did not begin to laugh very hard. Naturally, seeing that the heroine laughs at him, the guy was very surprised. Then he looked at his sister in bewilderment and tried to understand why she started laughing. Then the protagonist looked directly at her brother and asked him why he was faking his illness for so long, because she knew he was completely healthy. Immediately after these words, the game system sent a notification to the protagonist that Alfred was very much agitated, and the system also showed a notification that her brother was worried that his deception might soon be exposed. Naturally, the guy tried to justify himself, and approaching the girl, asked her what she's talking about. Naturally, he couldn't expect her to reveal his devious plan, but the protagonist sternly looked right at her brother and told him that she meant exactly what she told him, at which point she looks as if she would absolutely realize that the guy was cheating. Then the girl looked at her brother and asked him if he was stronger than her. Then she immediately grabbed his hand. Of course, then the guy screamed that he was hurt and asked his sister to let him go. Then the protagonist analyzed his reaction to her grabbing his hand and made the inference that the guy could definitely throw her hand off, but he's pretending to be weak on purpose. At the guy's squeals that he was hurt, the head butler, who is also their uncle, came. Then Alfred, in tears, looked at the butler and asked him to help him, because according to him, Blanche went crazy. Naturally, the butler decided to interfere in their conversation, and turning to Blanche, asked her to let the young gentleman go and hurt him no more. Then the protagonist let the boy go, after which he took hold of his wrist and began to say that his wrist was very badly hurt, while he was still coughing and crying. Naturally, the butler was concerned about this reaction of the protagonist and asked the boys if he was okay. Also hugging the boy, the butler said that he would be sure to report this to the Lord, so that he would be aware that the protagonist had hurt his brother. Then the girl just laughed in response to these words and thought about things happening exactly as she expected. Anna argues her reaction that she is no longer going to stand by, as it was before. But at that moment, all she was thinking about was what she saw on her character card, namely, the very 5 black squares that were in place of numbers in the morality scores. Then looking at my map slowly, instead of black squares began to appear a word. Namely, it said that there was some error in this point. Then the action is moved back some time, namely 3 years. On that day, the Marquis came to his son and informed him that Alfred was 7 years old this year. Also, according to Marquis, since their entire family had studied at the Imperial Academy, it was only natural that the youngest son should also study there. At the same time, the father said that it would be wonderful if the boy would also study for the same excellent grades as his older brother Pierre. Hearing these words, the boy as if even changed in his face. After that, the father left the boy alone to look at some papers on his desk. After a while, the boy looked at his watch and noticed that since his father left his room, 13 hours had already passed. Then, noticing how much time had passed, the boy suddenly started coughing very hard. This continued for some long time, after which the action moved from his office to the boy's bedroom. In the boy's bedroom was a doctor who was diagnosing him. According to the syllables of the doctor, the boy had a simple fungus. And then the doctor advised him to just rest for a few days. And soon, according to him, the boy should feel better. But upon hearing the diagnosis, the boy immediately grabbed the doctor by his clothes, and pulling him a little closer to him, the boy asked the doctor to tell all his family members that it was not just the flu, but a pretty serious illness. He starts begging the doctor to tell him that the disease is so serious that he won't even be able to enroll in the Imperial Academy. Realizing that the doctor would probably object, the boy decided to tell the doctor that he would benefit from the agreement, and that his father would pay the doctor a lot of money to cure the boy. When the doctor heard about it, he thought for a moment, but then smilingly told the boy that he would say 8, and that it was a very serious unknown disease that would have to be treated for a very long time. Hearing this, the boy was very surprised that the doctor agreed so easily, but at the same time, he was very happy, because now he would not have to join the Imperial Academy. Then, the action of the story moved back to the present day. Then the father finally deigned to visit Blanche in person, looking at his daughter. He said he was very much disappointed in her behavior of late. At this time in this room was also her brother with her older sister Marietta. Then the older sister said that she also felt very sorry for Blanche because she is very stupid, which, according to the older sister, she shows with her behavior. The older sister at this point began to accuse Blanche of telling their brother. According to the older sister, she doesn't understand how she could say such a thing to Alfred at lunch. Because unlike her, Alfred had never been healed by a priest. This one was still faking being sick and coughing. But the protagonist doesn't even seem to take her sister's words seriously and just smiling. She says that it's good because today everyone can see a miracle. Seeing the reaction of his daughter, who is obviously not sorry for anything, the father asked her if she could apologize to Alfred right now. But naturally, this request is more of a coercion than a normal request. But the protagonist does not agree with her father's opinion, and naturally is not going to make any concessions to her brother. Then, turning to him, she asked him to choose one thing. She put him to the choice of going now and showing the Alfredos to the priest, or she obviously would definitely not marry this half-dead Count Juan. Naturally, hearing such rudeness from his daughter, the father got very angry at her words, and then he swung, after which he hit Blanche very hard on the cheek, though obviously she was not at fault at all. After he struck the girl's face, Father said that now, let her repeat the same thing she said to him earlier. Seeing that Marcus had hit her, the protagonist just remained silent and thought for a while. But after a short thought, the protagonist covered her face, and without even looking in the direction of her father, informed him that she naturally fully understood his choice. Immediately afterward, looking at her father with a smile, she said that in 2 months, Don Juan will have to marry a corpse. Naturally, because of this ultimatum of the protagonist, Marquis was left speechless. Then raising his hand and trying once again to hit the protagonist, a very angry Marquis asked her how she can dare threaten him with her life. But the protagonist interrupted his attempt to hit her and said that if he perfectly understands what she is talking about, then maybe he would like to speed up their conversation a little. Hearing this, and seeing the joyful face of his daughter, Marquis stopped and did not hit the girl. Suddenly, after a short thought, the Lord called the butler into the same room. Immediately after the man entered, the Marquis ordered him to bring the priest into the room. Now, hearing his father's words, Alfred and his older sister, with whom they were still sitting in an embrace, were very much frightened, for they had expected their father to be more likely to take their side. After a short time, the action of the story moves to the hall of the Marquis's house. Then the priest who was called to show Alfred entered the hall. The priest came in and said that he was very happy to see Lady Blanche. But he also did not forget to introduce himself and told the girl that his name was Sigolin, and he also said that he worshipped the god of healing. Upon seeing the priest, the protagonist was very happy and thanked him. According to her, it was the priest's skill and healing that was so good that her speech impairment disappeared without a trace. But the priest said he had nothing to do with her healing and informed the girl that it was a miracle from God, because divine power cannot remove disability. Then the head of the family entered the same room. He turned to the priest and told him that he had called him here for his illness and his youngest son. Hearing this, the priest was a little surprised, but told the Marquis that, as he said earlier, divine power cannot cure chronic diseases. Then the protagonist waved his hand to the priest to pay attention to her, said that everything is possible after all, and her speech was stopped. Then the father and the priest looked at the girl, who was not going to retreat, and said that with the help of Sir Sigolin's divine power, it might be possible to cure the illness of her younger brother Alfred. Then, hearing these words, Marquis thought a little, because he realized that it really can be thought, because according to him, if you think about it, it can definitely work on his youngest son. Then suddenly taking the priest's hand, the Marquis looked at him and asked him to just look at his youngest son. Naturally, the priest, who realized that he would not cure the boy, said that he didn't even know if it would help. But since the Marquis asked so much, he was willing to try. Naturally, the priest was very happy to be trusted, and looked directly at Marquis and said he would do his best, while Marquis was just glad that maybe he could finally cure his youngest son. At this time in the same room enters Alfred, who obviously a little excited, coming closer to his father. The Marquis told him to sit down. Well, chair next to the priest. Then on the face of the guy could understand that he was very much excited. Then looking at the boy, the priest was a little happy and said that it was time to start the procedure. Then the priest crossed his arms, and around his hands appeared some unusual glow like something divine. Seeing this on the boy's face, you could see that he was very much scared. Then, immediately after the appearance of this unusual glow, the priest tried to touch the boy's forehead with one hand to finally cure him of his illness, at which time Alfred looked directly at that hand with a very frightened look. The boy immediately said that he didn't want anything from the priest, and shouted loudly and pushed him away a little. Immediately after that, the boy got up from his seat and pushed his father away. From the fact that the boy is a rather strong character who doesn't just show his strength, the Marquis fell to the ground, while Alfred was just running out of the room for the priest not to help him. Naturally, see so strange and inexplicable reaction of the boy priest remained in shock, as well as the Marquis himself, who could not understand why the boy did not agree to the procedure of cure with the help of the priest. At this moment, the Marquis, who was still on the floor, asked why Alfred had run away from the priest. He was evidently in great perplexity at his son's action. But the priest, who will help the Marquis to get up from the floor, said that now it is not the main question. The priest said that he is most of all interested in how the sickly child has so much strength to push the Marquis himself. At this point, the protagonist asked if Alfred still looked as sick as he did before, and the priest was a little surprised to hear this. Then the priest turned to the girl and looked at her in surprise, at which time she asked her father, "What was he doing? And why didn't he go and catch the brat?" At which point the father, obviously annoyed that he was wrong, just thought about the whole thing. Naturally, the priest did not want to believe that such an innocent creature as Alfred could lead his father by the nose for so long. But from the Marquis's face, you could see that he had already realized and guessed what the boy's plan was. Then, grabbing his head, the Marquis said that if everything was as he understood it, then everything the boy had been ill with for the last 3 years was a feigned illness. When the priest heard about it, he was very surprised and turned to the Lord and asked how it could be so. But the protagonist just smiled in response to her father's words, and realizing his wire looking at him asked if he now realized that she was right then. Immediately after that, Marquis tried to approach the main heroine and say something to her, but the girl immediately interrupted him and said that everything is fine and he should not try to apologize to her. At this moment, Marquis got very excited and said that his second daughter is a very good person who knows her father's heart. But the protagonist, who still continued to smirk, said that it was absolutely not true. According to her, she just doesn't want to hear her father's voice anymore. That's why she doesn't want to hear him apologize. Hearing this, father changed his face and remained speechless. It turns out, after Alfred's mosquito knot deception was revealed, the attending physician was immediately evicted from the Marquis mansion, at which point the butler simply threw the doctor out of their home with a kick in the ass. He also suffered consequences not only for the doctor, but also for the boy himself. Apparently, he was severely punished by his father. At that moment, Marquis was just telling off his son, while the boy, with his head down, realizing that he was at fault, listened to it. But the protagonist, who was in her bed, was thinking that the consequences that had been brought by Alfred were no longer her business, while one of the maids was holding the protagonist's hand, as if massaging her. Also, the maid said that he would bring a change of clothes for his mistress. Then, right after the maid left, the protagonist rejoiced that she was finally all alone and could be in her thoughts. She was also very happy about it because she realized that this time she would definitely be able to open her inventory, at which point the game interface appeared in front of the protagonist, where she mentally pointed the cursor directly at her character's inventory. Then, right after she opened her inventory, the protagonist noticed that there is some box that looks like a gift prize. It turned out to be a training set that contains all the necessary items for the game. Naturally, she was very surprised to see that there was a training kit in her inventory, because being the developer of the game, she realizes that she is not the main character. But she got the kit anyway. Then, with the help of thoughts choosing this box right in front of her, suddenly some kind of gift appeared. It turned out that the training kit was an item that was given to beginners starting the game. Immediately after the gift set appeared in front of the protagonist, she decided to open it without any delay. We also learn that the set contains 4 items that will help newcomers to adapt to the game. After Blanche decided to open the gift set, she saw that it contained the Nightingale ointment, which is good for physical recovery, as well as a map of the world with which she can navigate in the game. Further in the box was a coupon for free exchange of goods with which she will be able to get a lot of items randomly spinning the Wheel of Fortune. And also the last and most important gift was a white dragon egg with the help of which are born NPCs that will help in training. But it turned out that the white dragon egg was just an expectation of the protagonist, and in her gift set was only 3 items out of 4. Of course, it did not suit her. Jana began to shake the box trying to find the white dragon egg, because she does not understand how it can be so that it was not there. But she realizes that maybe it could be because Blanche isn't the main character. Or maybe she wasn't given the egg because it was 7 years before the original game's plot began. But at the same time, the main character is very happy that now she has at least the same ointment that can cure her feet. Immediately after the girl took in her hands this tube, she began to apply the ointment to her feet. Suddenly, right after she applied this miraculous ointment to her feet, Some divine glow appeared in the area where the ointment was applied. Apparently, that should cure her feet. Naturally, at this point, there were some changes in the characterization card. And her character, finally, Blanche's health was filled to the maximum level that was possible in the game. Immediately after the girl realized that the mother had worked and she started to move her toes, then she was very happy that finally her toes were moving, which denotes the fact that she would finally be able to walk. At this point, the girl looked really happy. After realizing this, the protagonist immediately decided to get out of bed to experience the new sensation of walking in the body of the character Blanche. Getting out of bed, she finally realized that she no longer has any problems with her legs. At this point, in the room of the main character enters the maid, who just aghast with surprise, because she did not expect to see standing on her feet the main character. The maid was very surprised, and drew the girl's attention to the fact that now finally her legs walk like a normal person. But the protagonist immediately ran up to her and covered the girl's mouth so that no one else would know about it. Immediately after the girl managed to shut up her maid, she showed her something must keep quiet about it. At this moment in the room to the main character enters once again that very butler. The protagonist hides with the maid behind a screen. Then the butler who opened the door asked the protagonist if the maid has caused her any inconvenience. At this point, the girl still covers the maid's mouth with her hand so that Tanya makes sounds. Then, in order to somehow make the butler leave, the main character said that the maid just hurt her leg a little, but she asks the butler not to worry because in her opinion, it is not serious. Then the butler said that if this maid is not suitable for her, he can make it so that further she served another girl. But the protagonist says that everything is fine. And then the butler said that he understood her and decided to leave the girl alone. Then, at this point, the protagonist decided to communicate with her maid, and still holding her mouth said that if she did not want to end up like her past maid Fleur, she would have to keep silent about what she saw. Naturally, the maid was very surprised by this, but the protagonist, still without slowing down, asked her maid if she knew what to do. Naturally, the frightened maid said that she understood everything perfectly, and her mistress should not worry about anything. Then, right after that, the protagonist asked her maid to change her clothes. Naturally, the maid said that of course she would do it, and there is no problem in that. Right after that, she started to put on the protagonist her clothes. Right after that, Blanche headed to her brother's room. There she saw Alfred crying at his bedside, and her older sister just comforting him. Then, Alfred starts to blame his sister Blanche for all his troubles. He said he just wanted to be at home with his sister, but everything goes wrong because of their sister. At this point, the boy is really crying because his father really did punish him. But the older sister, who is a little wiser than Alfred, says that a boy can't talk about his sister like that. But she emphasizes that besides Blanche will be a countess in 2 months. But this news doesn't seem to please Alfred at all. He emphasizes that Count Juan is a real bastard, but his older sister says that even though it's true, the Count is still a very rich man. According to her, when their sister marries an earl and becomes a very rich lady, finally their not-so-wealthy sister Blanche will finally help their family at least something. Finally, the boy will stop crying over the news. But then, his older sister hugged him and said that before this happens, they must calm Blanche's heart so that she can still help their family. According to her, if it doesn't work, she will not listen to her sister. At this point, the boy is just silent and thinking about Marietta's words. The action of the story moves to early morning, during the time 2 months before the wedding of the protagonist on the very Count, at which time the girl is still asleep in her bedroom, while many maids are trying to wake her up. Then a huge group of Fido servants gathered around the girl. One of them tells the others to take a wheelchair, and the other one tries to wake up the main character and tells her that Miss Marietta is waiting for her. At the same time, another servant tells the girl that the bath is ready for her. Blanche wakes up surprised to find so many servants gathered around her. She looks around and tries to understand what all the commotion is going on around her. Turns out she's so sleepy now because she late to bed last night because of a coupon for a free merchandise exchange. While she's thinking about it, the maid is already primping her before meeting her sister. It turns out a free merchandise exchange coupon is a use item that when used selects random items. It's essentially a coupon that is also a lottery ticket to win random items. It turns out that last night, taking advantage of the absence of the maids, the protagonist waited until dawn to play roulette. But it turned out that all her efforts were in vain, because despite them, she was not able to knock out of the roulette wheel anything worthwhile. It turns out, and fell out only a healing potion junior witch. This potion is a healing potion for low-level witches who managed to survive during the Holy Inquisition. Also, this potion restores stamina over time with a cleansing effect. Naturally, at this point, the protagonist thinks about the fact that she certainly could not expect to get a high-level item, such as an incredible apple of experience, but the lowest level item she could not expect either. At this moment, the maids bring the main character a beautiful dress and tell her that her older sister invited her to the greenhouse. Another maid says that she also sent the girl this beautiful dress and jewelry to her. Seeing this, the protagonist a little thought about everything that is happening. And then she immediately went to her bed, telling the maids that they should not even think about it. And they should just leave, of course. Hearing this, the maids were very surprised. Then they tried to somehow attract the girl's attention and asked her to at least look at the dress that her sister sent her. According to them, it was sewn in the atelier Miss Amboise, and the pearl necklace that was sent to her was worn by the mother of the protagonist herself. Hearing this, the protagonist opened her eyes. She said that the maids were right in all their words, but she noted that the necklace was very old and scratched. Next, the protagonist went on a rolling tour of the dress, saying that the first owner of this dress was her sister, but after she saw how another lady had a similar dress, she stopped wearing it. Then, already finally awake, the main character asked the maids if they really thought that she did not know about these facts. Of course, the maids did not expect it, and being in fright, did not know what to answer her. Then, right after the protagonist said these words to her maids, she lay back in her bed and covered herself with a blanket, and asked her to tell her sister that she must have overestimated her taste. After a while, her sister and the two maids who are behind her back burst into the room, at which point Marietta looks very angry that the girl did not accept her invitation to a tea party in the greenhouse. But the girl immediately softened her approach to her younger sister, realizing that the future of their family depended on her, and trying to somehow relieve her guilt, said that Blanche should understand her correctly, because these clothes and jewelry were not chosen by her, but by her maids. She even asked Blanche if it was true that her maids had very bad taste, but Blanche immediately got up from her bed and said that she didn't care about that, noting that her sister's maids didn't seem to have very good views of her. After they heard what Blanche told them, the maids were very much frightened, unlike her sister, who was very much enraged by Blanche's insolence and arrogance. Then Marietta tries to smooth things over and says that Blanche can't do that to her, because she is the one who has been worried about her sister all this time. And hearing this, Blanche seems to have softened a bit. And then her sister started doing even more theater, and emphasized that she was the one who had been taking care of Blanche since their mother died, at which point the older and sister looks like she was actually doing something good for her sister. But the protagonist easily parries all these facts, and taking the words that her sister took care of her, was she also asked if she understood correctly that means it was her sister who made her lame. Hearing this question, the elder sister returned from her dreams back to the real world. Her face changed, and she did not know what to say to Blanche on such a sharp attack in her direction. Suddenly, she became very angry and ordered all the servants who are in her room to leave immediately. Of course, the servants could not do anything but obey the order of their mistress. As soon as they left Blanche's room, the older sister approached the protagonist, and with a crazed look on her face, asked her what she meant when she said it made her lame. Then, Marietta asked what would happen if the tablet it in the presence of other people, according to her, the protagonist could be misunderstood. Well then, the protagonist once again easily parries the words of her sister, and says that most likely there would be no misunderstanding. Turns out she's saying all this because in the original game, Blanche was never lame. According to her, it was because of her older sister's interference. The protagonist is well aware that the incident was a faked accident, and it was the handiwork of her older sister. Obviously, because of this, she pressured Marietta in this way. Immediately after these words, you could tell from the look on her older sister's face that the girl was very worried, which is what the system notified the protagonist that the girl was very worried indeed. But then Blanche, realizing that she was right, decided to push her older sister even more and said that she was nothing more than trash to her. And she also emphasized that she didn't want trash in her room, thus hinting that her older sister should go away. Then Marietta immediately changed her face. Mixed feelings could be seen on her face, but the game system immediately issued a notification that the girl was very angry with the protagonist. Then Blanche once again decided to press her sister and asked her if she knew that if she disappeared from this house right now, the Marita would be forced to become the wife of Count Juan instead of her. Then Marita's little sister would wake up, because according to her, even if it happened exactly this way, their father would not allow her to marry this count, if only because she would soon become a princess. She asked her if she really thought she could be a princess. And when she heard this question, the older sister didn't really understand what she was talking about. But then Blanche decided to press Marietta once again and asked her why the third prince had never visited their house if they were really going to get married. According to Blanche, she realizes that this may be a secret engagement, but she also realizes that if it's still the case, the first prince should come to greet her older sister at least once before the wedding. Hearing this, the elder sister got even more angry and told Blanche that she did not understand anything about it, because according to her, the prince was just very busy, and that was the reason why he did not visit their house. But Blanche decided to press her sister even more and asked why the prince was so busy. She said that most likely he was seeing another girl. That was the question she asked her sister. At the same time, she noted that in any case, the older sister is too stupid if she chose a playboy prince as her fiancé. Hearing these words, Marietta was so angry that she even called her sister a fool. But at the same time, she says that it's still not so important, because she can't even walk on her own. Naturally, in this way, the redhead especially tried to get back at least some way to get back at her sister. Right after that, Marietta finally decides to leave her sister's room and asks her to prepare for the wedding in order not to embarrass their family. Leaving the sister of the protagonist loudly slammed the door. After Blanche was left alone, she finally began to move her legs, while the girl thought about the fact that her sister behaves very carelessly, while looking not particularly upset that she will soon have a wedding with an unloved earl. At this point, she is just contemplating the fact that in order to solve everything, she will just disappear. Further actions of the story move to the office of the count, whom the protagonist is to marry. Then one of his subjects asks the count if he wants him to poison his future bride. Then have a drink and a glass of your wine. Count Zhuang says that this flawed girl must die, because that's when her older sister, who is known throughout the continent for her beauty, will become his wife. Then the earl's servant said that the eldest son, who is famous for his genius, should marry the second daughter of the earl. Saying this, the servant also asked whether the boy should not then become the earl's servant for a term of 3 years. Then the self-assured Juan, with a smile on his face, asks his servant if he really thinks that this mild and noble fellow can help his smuggling business. Then, a little bowing, the servant said that in that case, he would hire a man and do everything within 1 week. Then, right after that, the servant asked why they needed that guy. Of course, the count pretended not to understand and asked who they were talking about. Then his servant said that he is talking about the guy who is imprisoned in the count's basement. Then smiling Juan asks his servant whether that guy is still dead. At the same time, he notes that his name is Ricardo, or something similar to that name, at which point the guy who is all mangled is in the count's basement in shackles, as it was the introduction of the protagonist. Then the smiling servant told his master that the lad was not locked up, but he inquired whether the count was not really going to pay him back the money he owed Ricardo. Looking at his servant with surprise and smiling a little, the count asked his servant if he had lost his mind, because according to him, if he returned all the money he owed to this guy, his fortune would be halved. Then the servant tries to persuade the count to return the debt. Then he says that if the count does not return it, the girl's father will not stand by quietly. Having said this, the servant is not sure of his words and asks if it is true. Then the count laughed a little at the words of his favors, and drinking his glass of wine said that he had everything under control. At the same time, he inquired what he could do if he could not stand aside. At the same time, he says that he is sure that having the most beautiful girl of the continent by his side, all the money of the country will be destroyed. while the arrogant count smiles, and you can see from his face that he is up to something evil. After a while, it was already deep night outside. The action of the story moves back to the mansion to the Marquis and his daughters. Then he came to Blanche and told her that he heard from Marietta that lately the girl is behaving extremely arrogant towards everyone. Right after that, he asks his daughter if she wants to tell him anything about it. But the protagonist, who has her arms crossed, says that naturally she doesn't want to tell him anything. She said she wouldn't do it simply because it was her father who should apologize to her and not her to him. When Marquis heard this, he smiled a little and said it was quite funny, and asked why he should apologize to her. At that, a little angry, he asks his daughter when it was he who told her to die. Naturally, Marquis asks this in a sarcastic way, trying to blame the protagonist for what she did to herself. Further, Marquis says it openly, and emphasizes that she herself jumped off the balcony on her own feet and became a bitch coke, at which point the protagonist is naturally a little surprised, but not confused, and said that she was just talking about the Alfreda. According to the protagonist, it was thanks to her younger brother that she found out that her father still considers her a helpless and stupid daughter. Then Marquis laughed a little and tried to justify himself by saying that she should not listen to her younger brother. Then the smiling protagonist said that she knows that, but besides, she can't ignore her lineage. Hearing this, Marquis gets very angry and once again yells at his daughter and asks her how long she's going to keep acting like this. Seeing her father's emotional state, the protagonist asked him if he really doesn't understand something. Hearing this question, Marquis was even more surprised, but then the protagonist emphasized that it was she who was able to endure all of this, not him. At this point, she also says that if she had tried to convince her father, then maybe all of this wouldn't have happened. Saying this girl wonders to her father if this is true, but she also asks if maybe he would have dug a grave for her right now. She also wondered if he would risk himself or become a ruined nobleman if it was not for his eldest daughter, but for her. Hearing this, the Marquis clutched his head, for he did not realize that he had to answer now. Marquis began to twist to somehow get away from the accusations of his youngest daughter and tries to say that everything was different then. But the protagonist, looking directly at him and seeing his expression as if he had already understood everything, she thought about the fact that her father would not risk his life after all, and that's when she realizes that her father does not care about her at all. Then, realizing this, the protagonist slightly lowered her head and said in a rage that in this case, her father should not dare to yell at her anymore. According to her, if he raises his voice at her one more time, she will die on the first night. But she notes that, of course, right after she tells the Count that her father did it. Immediately after that, the protagonist, as if she began to see everything in strange colors. Then there was a system notification from the game itself, which carried a warning that the protagonist is poisoned, of course. Seeing this, she was very surprised. Dear friends, and if you want to see the continuation of the story and find out whether the main character was poisoned and whether she still married the Count, then be sure to subscribe to the channel and do not forget to click on the bell to not miss new videos. And if you want to speed up the release of the second part, then be sure to put a like under this video clip, because when under it will gather 40,000 views or 5,000 likes and immediately start working on the next part. Then the father, seeing that something was wrong with the girl, told her that he understood that she was very upset. But shortly before the wedding, it was not worth it to be so stressed. At this point, he did not even have time to finish his thought, as the girl was thinking about something else. She notices that her eyes are getting darker, and the game system sends her a warning that the girl is poisoned. Of course, she is very surprised by this, and as if gasping, she wonders how this is possible. Suddenly, she began to cough up blood. At this point, tears even begin to appear in her eyes. Naturally, seeing this, the father also got up from his seat and tried to understand what was happening to his daughter. But he couldn't do anything, and just asked her what was going on with her. At this point, the girl just leaned her back against the couch. The father naturally became very frightened. Because of his intense consternation, he started asking if there was anyone else in the room. Naturally, he was a little concerned for the health of his children's daughter's upcoming wedding. At this point, she noticed on her status map that her health instantly decreased, and a new notice appeared in her notes that she was poisoned. at which point her health level dropped to 20. At this point, the protagonist remembered that she still had the healing potions of a younger witch that could help in her healing. The protagonist naturally realizes that she can't expect much from this potion, but she also realizes that it has a cleansing effect, which may help her in this situation. Tears can already be seen in her eyes, but she still won't take any action because she can't open her inventory in front of her father. Then, she came up with a plan to make her father leave the room and leave her alone. Choking on blood, she touched his shoulder and asked him to call a doctor because she said she was in a lot of pain. Naturally, the father is very confident and asked his daughter to be a little patient because according to him, she cannot die right now. Immediately in the head of the Marquis, as if some idea, suddenly, he ordered that a priest be called into that room. The father blames himself for the priest not being able to heal her disability as well. That's when he started running after the doctor. At this point, the protagonist once again opened her characteristic card, where she noticed that her health level had dropped to 5 units, at which point she realized that she had no more time. The protagonist realizes that she can't die like this, at which point she finally decides to open the inventory, while her health level drops rapidly. Immediately after her inventory is opened, she immediately decides to take the healing potion to heal herself, at which point she wonders how she has been living for the past 17 years. The moment the protagonist drinks the potion, she notices that her health level has dropped to 0, which means she should be dead by now. Due to her health level dropping too much, the protagonist falls exhausted onto the bed, at which point she even drops the potion bottle from her hands. After a while, a beautiful carriage pulls up to the house. It turns out inside is a handsome young man who looks not at all happy. We learn that this man's name is Pierre Markwright, and he is the older brother of Marietta, who is rumored to be the most beautiful girl on the continent. He is also the heir to the Markwright family and the genius of the century. When his carriage finally reached home and he stepped out of it, he immediately heard the joyous shouts of his younger brother, who was obviously connected with his arrival. It turned out to be the youngest of the sons of Marquis, who immediately ran up to his older brother and hugged him. Apparently between the brothers is a very strong bond. Pierre, in turn, is also very happy to see his brother. He also says that since the last time they met, Alfred has grown a lot. Then the boy says that this is indeed true while he emphasizes that he missed his older brother very much. But Pierre gets right to the point and says he heard the news. He also wonders what happened to his sister Blanche. Then Alfred tries to at least somehow get out of it. Then the action moves at once to the hall of the Marquis mansion. There the father communicates with his eldest son, and then Pierre asks if it is true that 10 days have passed since Blanche drank the poison and lost consciousness. Then the father says that even if Blanche tried to kill herself, she failed. He blames himself for the fact that his daughter was almost poisoned in his own house. The father says that he can hardly believe it. Then Pierre calms his father a little and says that in his opinion their sister will be all right. He says that Blanche is still the same girl who survived the fall from the 3rd floor. According to him, their sister is very strong. Then Marquis, who is holding his head, says that he would like it to be exactly as his eldest son says, emphasizing that he hopes so too. Marquis begins to cry and says that if Blanche dies in this way, other people may start to think badly of their family. It is obvious that the father is not worried about his daughter, but is worried about his reputation and the reputation of the family. Even so, the older son supports his father and says that their father had better get some sleep, for he has no face on him at all. Then giving his dad a little hug, he tells him that he will take him to the bedroom. Then the Marquis begins to ask for forgiveness from his son, blaming himself for all the failures, because he says that if only he could succeed in business, everything could be different. But Pierre calms his father and asks him not to say such things. After putting his father to bed, Pierre finally decided to leave his room. Suddenly, the moment he left, someone called out to him from behind, and Pierre turned around to see who it was. As soon as the guy did it, he saw that behind his back was his younger sister, Marietta. As soon as he saw the girl, she immediately jumped on him with her hugs. At this point, the younger sister started to play theater once again and said she would be very upset. The girl asks the guy what would happen if Blanche died there. Pierre once again begins to comfort a member of his family and asks the girl who told her that Blanche will die. But the girl does not calm down at all, and she asks what will happen if Blanche dies, and who will then marry the Count. Naturally, Pierre doesn't really understand what his sister is worried about. He tries to tell her that their sister tried to commit suicide twice. So why is she worried about the wedding? But he is interrupted by his sister. She starts yelling very loudly at her brother and notices that she is trying to kill herself. At which point, she starts asking her brother if he really doesn't know she was doing it. At this point, Marietta starts blaming the Count for everything that happens. According to her, this crazy old ghoul doesn't even know anything and only craves her. Hearing the words about his sister, the guy got very upset. Despite straight at her, he asked if she was now even worried about their sister and her condition. He also asks, is it true that she is only worried about having to marry the Count instead of their sister? Hearing this question, Marietta is a little embarrassed even. Then she still managed to find a way out of the situation and told Pierre that she was worried about their sister's health and who would marry the Count. But Pierre is no fool at all. And noticing what his sister was really worried about, he decided to tell her to her face and said that in his opinion she was only worried about the wedding. Then it was as if Marietta smiled a little, and with an evil look told Pierre that he had always been like that. According to her, the guy was always making her look like the bad kid in the family. At this point, she even started accusing her brother of supposedly being a hypocrite. You could tell from the guy's face that he was very concerned and agitated by these words. Then the sister asks Pierre if he really forgot, at which point she calls him a naughty brother, but doesn't forget to mention that Blanche remembers everything. Then Pierre was a little surprised at her words too, and asked what the girl meant. Then she looked at him with her strange look and asked him if he was an accessory. Seeing at this point the surprised face of her brother, she asked, is it true that he no longer remembers how they made Blanche limp together? It turns out that Pierre was also present then. It turned out that when Blanche was only 9 years old, in the fall they went on vacation with the whole family to a local villa. At that time, Pierre and his sister felt hate for Blanche. Turns out it was all just because they were horrified to know that their family had the disadvantage of a stuttering child. So Blanche came up to them and told them to all go together. At that point in time, she really did stutter quite badly. It turns out they tricked their little sister into climbing a high cliff, while Pierre and his sister just watched the girl climb up there. Then Marietta told Blanche to stay there until they came back. And that is when she said they would play with her tomorrow. Then crying Blanche was very upset because she would miss the appetizers. But Pierre still pretended to support her and asked his sister not to worry because he promised her that they would bring snacks for her when they came back here, so she should wait patiently for them here. At this moment, the guy thought that they were interested to see how long the girl would hold out. Then the protagonist was very upset about what she had heard, but the joyful older brother and sister were just leaving and Riley wished her enjoy the wait. After they returned to the local villa, Marietta asked her brother if she could eat the portion that was meant for their little sister, at which point, Pierre said that of course she could. It was at that moment in time that they left their little sister all alone in the woods. It turns out, after this incident, it took 3 whole days, and only then they managed to find her. When the father was able to find his youngest daughter, he saw that she was lying on the ground emotionless. Also, when they came closer, they noticed that her leg was very badly damaged. It turns out that it was after this incident that a member of the family, Mark Wright, became disabled. Right after Marietta reminded Pierre of what had happened, the protagonist woke up in her bed. Waking up in her bed, the protagonist immediately grabbed her head. She looked at her hands in surprise and was surprised that she was still alive. After realizing that the girl was still alive, she immediately decided to open her status card to see what was going on with her health level and to see why she was still alive. When she opens her card, she sees that her health has increased to 8 units, and there is a note on her card that her health is restored due to the effect of using the Junior Witch's healing potion. The girl at this point thinks about the fact that her health level regenerates rather slowly, but she also realizes that similarly, it has a detoxifying effect. Right after that, she decided to get up from her bed and go to the window to open it. Right after she did that, the wind from the window blew right into her face. At the same time, the girl thinks about the fact that it seems that the Count intends to take her out of the game in order to further marry her sister. She also realizes that if the Count finds out she's alive, he'll try to kill her again. At which point she opens the menu to see what other abilities she has. She also realizes that the original escape plan, in which she was going to run away and get revenge the day before the wedding, has gone awry, and now she's not going to get away with it. But she does take from her inventory a map of the world to navigate the terrain, all because she realizes that she must leave this house as soon as possible. Apparently, she needs all of this to free herself from her father's influence, and in order to do so, she must leave the kingdom of Lupin. At this point, Blanche realizes that because Pierre is the heir to the family, he cannot go to the Empire, because the Empire is a place where identification is difficult, and even a woman can find work. But realizing that her plan could be jeopardized again, she decides that she can't let anyone else find out, at which point the card disappears from her hand. Just then, the girl turns around and sees Pierre behind her back, who looks very scared. It seems to be because he saw his sister walking, but it turned out that it was not because of this. Then, Pierre thought that he hoped that this time the girl is not going to commit any rash acts, and will not want to jump out of the window again. But I admit that it is possible he immediately shouts to his sister that she should not do it. The guy even kneeled in front of her, and for this, then the girl just watched him with amazement. The kneeling guy said he was wrong. He even started crying, and asked the girl not to think anything bad anymore. At this point, Pierre looks like he is really worried about his sister. Then, Blanche looked at her brother with surprise, and smiling a little, she pretended to be very glad that Pierre had really come back, at which moment she began to approach him. Pierre also noticed that the girl had learned to walk. What he saw made him very much surprised, and even turned to shock. The guy could not take his eyes off her legs, but the Planche who came up to him held out her hand for him to rise and congratulate him on his homecoming. Then Pierre still plucked up the courage to say something to his sister, but he could not utter a word because of how surprised he was. Then the protagonist anticipated what he wanted to ask, and said that it was true. Also, she asked if he was glad that she was healed. She says that it was thanks to him that she was magically healed. And Pierre was even more surprised, because he didn't know what was going on. With his head down, he tried to say something, but the protagonist said that it's okay, because thanks to him the Count will be very happy. She asks her brother if she's right. She also emphasizes that if it weren't for her stutter or limp, she could have been a bride who is no different from her older sister. Certainly, if her brother had asked the princess for help from the beginning, she wouldn't have been sold to the Earl as payment for a debt. Then Pierre felt even more guilty than before. But the protagonist calmed him down and touched him on the shoulder and said that she had no grudge against her brother. But she asked him if he could fulfill her one wish. Then Pierre, who felt guilty, said that she should just tell him what she wanted, and then he would do whatever she wanted. Then the protagonist smiled because that's exactly what she wanted. It turns out she knows in advance that in 7 years this world will turn into an abyss, with monsters bursting out of the dungeons. At this point in her mind, she even gets pictures of how it's going to play out. Total as poor people fighting some unknown monsters that look more like mutants. However, she also knows that then the protagonist named Anastasia, who will receive the revelation of heaven, will appear and save the continent from chaos. But it's not going to happen quickly, as countless secondary characters like her will die in the process, at which point it becomes apparent that the main character may die as well. She realizes that in that case she has only one place to go, and that place turns out to be the extraterrestrial lawless city of Digitalis. It is the place where you can find peace even in the chaos that will happen. And it is there that lives the very enemy of the heroine, who does all the evil in the world and condemns the good. It turns out that this very person is that young guy who is imprisoned in the Count's basement, and he is a villain named Ricardo, and the protagonist has everything she needs to get there and save her life. At this moment, she's sitting on her knees right in front of her brother, just like him. After these thoughts, Blanche still voiced her desire to Pierre. It turns out that she asked him for permission to look once in the treasury. Naturally, the older brother a little surprised by this, but the protagonist has a special reason to go there. All because in the treasury of this mansion there is a thing that Pierre will give to the heroine in the future. And it is when equipped with this bracelet of the White Warrior experience is doubled. It turns out that this White Warrior's bracelet is a rather hidden object. In order to get her brother to let her go there, she starts to pity her and says that Pierre and his sister often went there and looked around when she was very young. According to the girl at the time, she was terrible. That's why she could hardly get into the treasury. It is obvious that in this way she just presses on pity, but also says that before leaving the family, she wants to look at it at least one glance. When Pierre heard this story, he even began to cry a little. At this point, he could see tears on his face, but he told his sister that tomorrow he would take the key from his father and take his sister there. Hearing such joyous news, had earlier rushed to hug her brother and thank him for daring to help her after all. It turns out that she is also very happy because after all, the only person she can trust is her brother. Blanche directly told Peru, but it is obvious that this is not the case, and she is just bribing Pierre and pressuring his pity to help her plan. We can understand this because her moral state still shows the error of her ways. The next day, the action shifts to the Marquise's office. He hands the key to the treasure trove to his youngest daughter, and he also informed her that it is the key to their family treasure trove. At this time, the protagonist thanked her father, while still being in a wheelchair, which she had no need of, for she had cured her legs. But father said she should not thank him, and that they should all thank God that the girl woke up and lived. And he said that since it was her only wish before marriage, of course it should be fulfilled. Then, taking the arms of the chair in his hands, the Marquis decided to lead the protagonist into the treasury of their family. On the way, they met with her older brother Pierre, to whom the girl instructed to keep quiet and not to say that she can walk. It turned out that last night Pierre had agreed to keep the fact that her feet were healthy. She realizes that perhaps because of guilt, he listened to her and didn't question her, asking unnecessary questions. Why should it remain a secret? Suddenly, the elder sister appeared in front of Pierre, the Marquis and Blanche, and greeted them all. At this moment, she looked very pleased, and as if she had something in mind. Then, right after that, Marietta ran up to her father and hugged him and started to pretend that she was going to cry. Then her father asked her what had happened. But the girl asked a counter-question and wondered if he was really going to leave her here while he looked at the family treasures with them. Then the father yielded to the girl's entreaties and took her with him. After they had reached the treasury, Marietta insisted that the girl should open the treasury, for she too was curious, as it had been a long time since she had been there last. Immediately after these words, Blanche began to open the treasury, and after the door to this room opened and did not notice that the room looks rather empty. Then Marietta was very much surprised at what she saw, for in her opinion this room had become very empty during the time she had not come here, at which point her father just coughed a little as if he were ashamed of something. But the main character has already noticed the ring she came here for. Of course, after they entered the treasury, she immediately asked her father what the ring was. Then the joyful father decided to tell his second daughter what kind of bracelet it was. He said it was a white dragon bracelet. According to him, it belonged to Lady Markwright, who was the princess of a kingdom in the desert. At which point the father took the bracelet on his arm to show it to his daughter. Naturally, seeing the bracelet that the main character was after, she immediately asked him if she can try it on right now. Hearing such a question from his daughter, father said that of course she can do it. And then the protagonist put on a bracelet of the white dragon. It turns out on the card of this item can be learned that it adds 400 mana, reduces stress by 200 units, and increases experience. Plus adds the effect of poison defense effect of low resistance and increases inventory, all because the bracelet is made by pressing desert sand. It turns out that the desert was in the ancient kingdom, which to date no longer exists. It turns out that the protagonist knew that this item was effective for increasing experience, but she had no way of expecting it to help her in all those aspects that were presented in the item card. Seeing this, she was even very surprised by it. However, the protagonist realizes that this is what was to be expected from the object that Pierre will use to subdue the protagonist, while her elder sister was watching all this with envy. Then she immediately went to Blanche and said that she had enough of trying on this item, because according to her, she also very much wanted to wear it, at which point the girl tried to snatch the bracelet from her sister. But Blanche started to resist it, and asked Marietta if she had not worn this bracelet enough. When she was a little girl, seeing the whole situation, even her father took her younger sister's side. He said that Blanche was right, and let her wear this bracelet just for today. Hearing that her father supported Blanche, Marietta got a little angry, and even for a while the girl remained speechless. Then Blanche began to look at the wall and immediately asked her father happily what the carving on the wall was. Then the father turned away to show and explain to his daughter what the carving is on the truth, at which moment Blanche removes the bracelet from her hand. Immediately after she took off the bracelet, the girl immediately tried to hide it in order to get this bracelet out of the treasury. Then it was noticed by her older sister, who was watching closely. Naturally, she was not happy that Blanche tried to steal the bracelet, which the girl immediately tried to tell her father in a hurry. But suddenly, when her father asked her what was going on, the girl was silent. She seemed to think for a while, and informed her father that nothing was wrong, and it looked like she had just made a little mistake. Immediately after these words, the father turned back to the wall. Then he told Blanche that their ancestors had written, "Here is something of aggravation." Then Marietta thought this was her chance. The girl believes that if her family finds out that Blanche has stolen a family heirloom, her father and brother will never take her side again. After a short time, it was already nightfall outside. The whole family gathered in the hall of the house. Then the furious father asked his children if the white dragon bracelet was really stolen. He emphasizes that it is a treasure he had to keep in this family, even at the cost of all the possessions he has. Then, surprised by this fact, Pierre said that today only their family was in the vault. Then, realizing where the conversation is going, the eldest sister suggested to her father that they all search Blanche's room. Then, the father was a little surprised at this suggestion and asked his daughter, "What is she talking about?" Then, pointing her finger directly at the main character, and her sister said that she saw it happen. According to her, she saw with her own eyes how Blanche stole the white dragon bracelet. Naturally, the protagonist was very surprised by these accusations, as well as her older brother. But then the father tried to somehow protect his daughter and said that it cannot be. He asked the eldest daughter, "Is it true that she is now trying to frame her own sister?" But Marietta is not going to back down and says that they should just look around the room and see for themselves that her words are completely true. Then the Marquis called the butler and ordered him to search every nook and cranny of the house. After a short time, the butler still managed to find the white dragon bracelet, which he brought to the crowd. Then the surprised Marquis asked how it could be. Naturally, Marietta, who decided to take advantage of the situation, wryly remarked that she had warned everyone about this. Then, grabbing his head, Marquis asked if what Marietta said was true. But then the butler interrupted Marquis and told him that everything is not as he thinks, according to Marquis. This bracelet was not found in the room of the main character, and even on the contrary in the room of Marietta. Hearing about it, Marquis even more surprised. 450. Because of the butler's words, the whole family was left speechless. Especially the eldest daughter, who was accused by the butler, was very surprised. She blushed a little and asked in surprise how this could be. 451. But then the blushing girl decided to justify you somehow and indignantly said that she didn't do it. Then the butler smashed all her excuses and said that with all this, the white dragon bracelet was found on her dressing table. 452. Then the older sister even got up from her seat and started yelling loudly and blaming Blanche for all her troubles. She asks her sister if she really did it. 453. Suddenly, taking her younger sister by the shoulder, Marietta started blaming her sister for everything and said that she was the one who put the bracelet in her room. 454. Then the main character blushed a little and made an innocent look and began to justify you. She said that she could not do it because she could not even move without a wheelchair. Of course, then Maria realized that she was in a complete trap. 455. Then once more the father interfered in their quarrel. He called his eldest daughter's attention to her conduct and made her apologize to the Blanche at once for such unbecoming behavior. 456. Then she was even more surprised, for her father once again took her sister's side. Then, crying, the girl began to say that it was not her. 457. At this moment, all the family members are watching the hysterics of the older sister. They can't even say a word because they think she is to blame for what happened. 458. But then, a moment of silence is interrupted by Blanche, who says that she will now go back to her room. because perhaps she has not yet fully recovered from everything that has happened. According to her, this whole situation is very exhausting for her. 459. Suddenly, Pierre rose from his seat and asked his little sister's permission to take her to her room. After a short time, the girl was already in her bed. 460. At this time, Pierre was still in her room, making a fire from his sister's room, at which point a system notification appeared in front of the protagonist that Pierre was doubting her. 461. Then the protagonist seemed to feel guilty and said that Pierre was right, although Persha didn't say that. But the protagonist went on to say that she had planted the bracelet in her sister's room. 462. Naturally, good-natured Pierre could not understand why the girl had done so and decided to ask her directly. But Bliss said that simply before leaving this house, she wished to awaken their sister from her 463. At this point, Pierre became even more confused about where this conversation was going, and once again asked his sister what she was talking about. But then Blanche said that she didn't want to marry just for the good of their sister. 464. Hearing Blanche's point of view, Pierre said that if she does not agree to this marriage, then their family will go bankrupt and become useless. But the protagonist easily parried this argument and asked her brother, doesn't he really understand that the game tried to poison her? The girl says that she understands perfectly well that Count Juan needs their sister and not her. 465. Then, once again, determined to press her brother's sense of pity, she asked him if it was not enough for him that she should marry in place of their sister, but that he wanted her to die at the hands of that earl. 466. Hearing these words, Pierre seemed to lose his temper for a moment, and said that this was not at all true, at which point tears came to his eyes, and he remarked that he could no longer lose his Blanche. 467. Pierre goes on to say that Blanche no longer stutters or has a limp, and since that accident he prays to God every day for forgiveness and for his sister's recovery. 468. At this point, Pierre was sitting on his knees right in front of the main character, but then she decided to approach him, and crossing her arms, the girl asked the guy to wake up because God was not protecting her. 469. According to her, she saves and protects herself from all those who have a negative attitude towards her. Then her brother once again shed a feeble tear, and as if thinking about something. 470. Then the girl turned to her brother and said that if he wanted to be free from the guilt of what he had done to her feet, let him ask forgiveness directly from her and not from God, at which point she held her weeping brother by the head. 471. Then she also said that even if it was just for one time, Pierre would give her all of himself. At that moment, the boy did not answer anything and just listened to his sister's words. 472. Then the action moves to the room of the older sister of the family. There the girl writes something and thinks about the fact that she really cannot bear it because she has never done such a 473. According to her, Blanche is just a wench who is always flashing in front of her and who doesn't seem to know how to behave. Suddenly the angry Marietta is distracted by someone. 474. Then she turned around and asked what was wrong, at which point the maid who was behind her said she had something to tell her. 475. After the maid told her news to her mistress, she could not believe it was true, and grabbing the maid's hands, she asked if it was true that Blanche could walk. 476. Then the maid said that it was really so, and her sister could really walk. According to the maid, she saw it as clearly as she now saw her before her. 477. That's why the maid begs her mistress to get her friend Fleur out of the cellar. She says, if things continue like this, her friend might just die down there. 478. At this point, Marietta thought that if Blanche really can walk, then, as expected, the incident with the white dragon bracelet was her fault. Realizing this, the older sister even calls Blanche a creature. 479. Having decided to tell this news to her father, the girl immediately turned around and headed as if on the move with the words that she must see her father urgently, right now. 480. After Marietta told her father about everything, he was a little surprised and asked his daughter what kind of nonsense she was talking about, because it's just not possible. 481. But the girl, as always, was not going to back down, and declared with certainty that it was true. According to her, she even has a witness. And if her father doubts, he can go with her and check it out right now. 482. Then the Marquis said that Blanche was now in the street with Pierre. Naturally, Marietta was very much surprised at this, and as if even a little thoughtful. 483. After a short thought, the girl immediately asked her father rudely whether the white dragon bracelet is in place. Of course, the Marquis does not understand why these questions, because the bracelet is in place. 484. But then their family conversation is interrupted by the butler, who informs the Marquis that the white dragon bracelet is missing again. Of course, the Marquis cannot believe it and asks, "How can this be?" 485. At this time, a carriage is hurrying away from the house. The coachman is the eldest son of the family, Pierre. The boy looks a little worried but determined. 486. Realizing what was going on, the Marquis and his guards immediately followed the carriage on horseback when it was already dark outside. But they were not able to catch up with the carriage. 487. The angry Marquis immediately ordered his children to stop now, being so angry that he even called them devils. 488. Then, seeing that the carriage was not even going to stop, the Marquis took out his pistol and fired a control shot into the sky, causing the carriage horses to become very frightened. 489. Due to too much fright, the horses began to behave uncontrollably, and subsequently they overturned the carriage on which Pierre was traveling. 490. Then because of this and the carriage fell out Pierre, who banged his head very hard against one of the trees. Seeing this, the Marquis was very much alarmed for his son's health. 491. He immediately started to approach him even faster to see what happened to him. Then one of the guards said that it looked like the guy had just lost consciousness for a while because of the blow. 492. Hearing this, the father thanked God that his son was all right, and immediately asked his men where his daughter was. Naturally, they immediately began to search the carriage. 493. After the boys opened the door to the carriage, they noticed that Blanche was in it. Of course, the boys immediately hurriedly reported this to the Marquis. 494. Making a concerted effort, they immediately got Blanche, and then looking directly at his daughter, the father said that she should not die now. The father even began to cry and asked his daughter how he should pay off the family's debts if she were to die now, at which point the girl began to make some signs of life. 495. So yes, Blanche told the Marquis that a lot of trouble had happened that night. Seeing this, the Marquis was very much surprised and said that it just 496. Then we can notice that the one who was rescued by the guards together with the Marquis is not Blanche. It turned out to be the same priest who cured the girl. Of course, this deception was immediately noticed by the Marquis himself. 497. A bewildered Marquis asked what the hell all this masquerade meant. Immediately after this, the action of the story is moved back 3 hours to Marquis's mansion. 498. Then the Marquis concluded that if Pierre's carriage had passed through the west gate, the destination was the harbor, which is where he said his daughter wanted to go, then get on a boat and escape. 499. Then he ordered his men to gather quickly and not to miss them. Then, naturally, all the lads agreed and set out to fulfill the Marquis's task with him. 500. Naturally, rumors that Pierre and his sister had eloped reached the maids, one of whom asked what would happen to the wedding and what would happen to the whole family afterwards. 501. While they were all chatting amongst themselves, some of the maids were about to leave. Of course, without attracting unnecessary attention, the maids managed to get out of the family home easily. 502. It turns out that the maid was the one who was able to sneak out of the house without attracting attention, because no one knew she was a walker. 503. Immediately afterward, the action moves back to the present. Then a waking Pierre told his father that his sister had left them. According to him, the little girl will now have a life of her own. 504. Then, the action of the story moves to a month later. Then, on the floor fell a lot of residues of apples. It turns out that these residues are not from ordinary apples, but from apples of experience points. 505. Then the system was showing a lot of notifications about level up. It turns out the main character had already managed to reach level 198 during that time. And she wasn't going to stop, just kept eating apples and experience. 506. It turns out that as the developers of the game, as a result of mobilization and all sorts of tricks, she still managed to reach level 199 in just 1 month of play. It becomes obvious that all this happened thanks to the apples of experience points that can be obtained for the execution of the hidden quest. Thanks to them, experience increases by at least 500%, and the invitation to 20,000 paracents immediately after eating this apple. 507. In fact, the protagonist has been in the carriage all this time, and she's thinking that she's finally made it to the lawless city of Digitalis. 508. As soon as she got here, the girl opened the game menu. There, she decided to hover over her status icon and saw that her health had increased several times compared to what it was, and her strength had increased disproportionately. There was also a note that the effect of the white dragon bracelet greatly increases magical power and stress disappears. 509. She is also well aware that with a stamina of 248, she is stronger than the vast majority of men, and she is also aware that the level of an ordinary man who is not a spirit warrior is between 1 and 15, and she is 199. 510. According to the girl, this is just great news, because right now she is completely ready to meet Ricardo. At this moment, she saw some bar and decided to go into it. 511. Entering the place, the girl saw a lot of men, and also there is immediately caught the eye the acrid odor in this institution. It turns out there is also a ring where there was a fist fight. 512. Seeing all this, Blanche thought about the fact that, in the original work, the city she came to was a city of gold and vice, and it was not at all as squalid as it is presented here. 513. She realizes that perhaps it's because the market for byproducts in the dungeons has not yet been created. Suddenly, the protagonist was grabbed by the shoulder by a man. Turning to her, he asked if it was the first time the protagonist was here. 514. When she turned around and saw a scary man who was apparently drunk, she grabbed him by the head and arm. 515. And noticed that what he said was completely true, and it was his first time here, and that's why she pulls him out of the place and says that's why she needs a guide. 516. Right after that, the main character hit the guy's head against a pole, because of which he asked her to let him go, and then they could talk about the service she was interested in. 517. Then the interface of the game reappeared in front of the protagonist. It turns out the guy it grabbed by the head is called Jack, and he is a street thug. Then she decided to put the cursor directly on his status icon to understand who she is dealing with. 518. After opening this guy's status card, she saw that he wasn't that strong, but she was very surprised that at 47 years old, he had as much strength as her 10-year-old brother, Alfred. 519. Then, while the protagonist was looking at his status card, Jack tried to get out of her grasp, but the protagonist didn't get confused and didn't let him make a single unnecessary move. 520. Then the man started crying very hard and begged Blanche to let him go and not to kill him. Then the girl said she would let him go if he would answer a couple of her questions. 521. According to Blanche, she came here to find Ricardo from the Giotto family. She asked Jack, "Where is this guy?" Then Jack suddenly raised his hand up, which was clenched into a fist. 522. The guy immediately started yelling very loudly that there is a girl in this establishment who is looking for the Giotto family. He immediately asks for someone to find the boss's son. 523. Then after these shouts, some man came out and asked the protagonist who she was. Then the protagonist decided to look at his status card and found out that this man's name was Silvano, and she also saw his power. 524. Then, looking at the man, the protagonist told him that her name was Blanche, and she had come here to be part of the Giotto organization. 525. Naturally, the man was not at all delighted with the idea of the girl. Because of this, he immediately asked why she was looking for Ricardo's family. But then the main idea, not confused, and said that she would only report it when she met him. 526. But the man naturally hesitated and asked the girl how he knew she was not a henchwoman of Count Juan, at which point the man looked as if he were giving some sign to someone. 527. Immediately after that, a large number of men who were in the bar pointed their guns directly at the protagonist. Also, at that moment, a system notification appeared that the Giotto family was challenging her. 528. Naturally, the protagonist is a little surprised that the whole family of the man she is looking for is against her, and she also wonders what the Count has done to this man that he is so set against him. 529. After the man came a little closer to Blanche, he asked her to let Jack go. Naturally, the protagonist immediately obeyed his order and let the guy go. 530. Then she said that if she had known that this man was a member of the Giotto family, she would have treated him differently. But Jack is no longer interested and just gets as far away from the girl as possible. 531. Then the man smiled and said that although he knew nothing about this girl, he was still impressed by her courage, and thus, according to him, she deserved his recognition. But he also emphasizes that they do not accept women in the family. 532. Then, hearing this, the protagonist thought about it for a while, but as if she wasn't even upset, she glanced at the table nearby, and then she clenched her fist. 533. And suddenly the protagonist struck a very hard blow on the table she was previously looking at which point the table shattered into many pieces because of her too strong blow. 534. Naturally, all the men who were in the institution stared at this spectacle with open mouths. But then, the satisfied protagonist asked why they do not accept women into the family. 535. Seeing Blanche's abilities, the man was also a little surprised. He wondered about everything that was going on, and after a short thought, looking directly at the main character, he told her to go with him. 536. Then the man escorted the girl to some very beautiful house. After she went in, the girl thought about the fact that no matter how things went, and you can't say for sure whether the Leagitro will take over the Digitalis or not. 537. Then some young man appeared in front of Blanche. He asked the main character if she understood correctly that the girl wants to meet his son. Then, looking at this man, she noticed in front of her a handsome and very young white-haired guy. 538. Opening his card, the protagonist learned that this man's name is Ilya. She also saw all the statistics and his character, and also realized that this man is Ricardo's father. 539. Then the girl also thought about the fact that this person is a level higher than her younger brother, who is a soul mage, yet this person's fame, 356. 540. At the same time, she immediately decided to calm all her thoughts, because at the moment it did not matter at all, because this man would be killed by Ricardo himself anyway. 541. It turns out Ricardo will kill his father when he turns 18 and then take over the entire mafia family, at which point we see how this will play out, and the moment the son stabs his father in the heart with a sword. 542. Further, Ricardo's life would only go uphill, and by the age of 22, he would take the throne of the lawless city and become a full-fledged ruler of that population. 543. Not long after the man turns 30, Ricardo will destroy half of the continent with the help of an army of monsters and will become the most important enemy of the protagonist Anastasia. 544. Then Blanche realizes that all these prophecies mean that if she stays by his side, she won't have to fight on this hellish continent. 545. Then she realizes that if everything goes according to plan, she will just enjoy a peaceful life in this safe place, as if the protagonist is already imagining her future life. 546. But she doesn't plan to end her plan there and thinks that after she enters his trust, the girl will find a way to frame Ricardo and side with the protagonist Anastasia. 547. It is after all these actions, in her opinion, she will be able to live the rest of her days calmly and carefree, while swimming in a pile of money and other riches that she will inherit. 548. That is why she did not immediately turn to the protagonist, but came here to find Ricardo. Then, without waiting for an answer from the protagonist, Ricardo's father decided to get up from his seat. 549. Then Ilya went up to the girl and took her hand. At that moment, looking directly at her hand, he said that the girl had a very beautiful 550. According to him, she has a splendid hand without any calluses or shams. He thinks her hand as if it belonged to a noble family. According to him, it is strange no aristocratic family lives. 551. But the protagonist did not listen to his thoughts, and immediately grabbed the man's hand. Squeezing his hand a little, she reminded him of the meeting with his son. 552. Naturally, Ilya was very surprised because the protagonist held his hand very tightly. From her strong grip, his hand even blushed. At this point, Oren thought about, how can this girl have so much strength? 553. At the same time, a somewhat confused man says that it is not in his principles to introduce his son to an unknown girl. Also, immediately after these words, he pulls out his hand and grabs the main character while she looks at the man with surprise. 554. But Ilya still doesn't let on that he's somehow excited and says that since the main character wants to join their big family, he'll let her. 555. Then upon hearing this, the boss's counselor immediately entered the room and reminded him that it was a very strange decision to accept strangers into their family. And on top of that, this person was a girl. 556. Seeing the reaction of his assistant, the boss naturally realized that he was in a bit of a hurry and told Blanche that he would accept her into the family with one condition. It turned out that this condition was that the girl must pass the entrance test. 557. Then, looking directly at Ricardo's father, she asked him if she understood correctly that if she did this test, he would let her meet his son. 558. Then a smiling Ilya said that of course it was, to which naturally the main character also reacted positively and said that it was great news. 559. According to her, whatever the difficulty test is, she can still pass it. Of course, at this point she blushes a little, but says confidently and looks Ilya straight in the eye. 560. The action is moved forward a bit. Then it is already nightfall outside, and the protagonist is beautifully dressed in a red dress, at which time she is accompanied by the very counselor she met in the bar. 561. Silvano asked the butler who came out to meet them to tell Mr. Mario that he had brought him a present. Then the butler blushed a little and said that naturally he would obey Mr. Silvano's order. 562. After a short time, the protagonist together with her patron were already in the house of Mr. Mario. Then, looking at Silvano with astonishment, the girl asked him if this was really her examination. 563. Then the man looked at the protagonist and said that if she wanted to join their organization, she had to prove how she could help them. 564. Suddenly, at this moment in the room enters Mr. Mario himself, who asked with surprise who it is that came to him. The man is very happy to see his guests because he has already been told that he brought a gift from Ilya. 565. At this point, the protagonist sees this character's status card and learns that his name is Mario Scrooge, and she also sees all of his characteristics, including strength and glory. 566. Suddenly, Mario sat down next to the main character, grabbed her by the waist, and pulled the girl against him. Then the man started laughing loudly and saying that he was finally a foreigner, and had prepared the perfect gift for him. 567. Then the protagonist looked at Maria as if disgusted, but still realizing that he was a stepping stone to achieve her goal, said nothing. 568. Then Mario got up with the protagonist from the couch. Suddenly, Blanche said that they would see their patron a little later, and Mario himself asked the counselor to give some words to Ilya. 569. Then the man said to give Ilya the words that if everything remains like this, it does not matter to him will not get along 10 years or all 100. Immediately after that, Mario together with his companion leaves the room. 570. At this point, the counselor wondered if Blanche would really do this just to become a member of the organization. In his opinion, her actions were too stupid. 571. After a short time, someone broke into Ilya's room. The guy was naturally a little surprised, because it was in the middle of the night and he was already asleep. Then Ilya's counselor came to see what the noise was about. 572. Then opened the door. The counselor was very surprised, because he saw on the floor the corpse of the man to whom he sent the protagonist. At this time, the girl looked very calm, as if she had not done anything. 573. The counselor in his turn watched everything with his mouth open and started to shake from fear. At the same time, Ilya also looked quite upset and thoughtful, as if he didn't know what to do. 574. Blanche, unlike everyone else, looks more calm and happy. She says that Mario was really weak, but at the same time decides to make a joke. She says that when she said that he was weak, she meant only his neck. 575. Upon hearing this, the counselor yelled at the protagonist and asked her if she was out of her mind. Then a system notification appeared in front of the protagonist that Silvano's stress level had increased significantly. 576. He immediately began shouting at her and asking if she even knew what she had done. For according to him, she had destroyed the harmony for the enthronement of which they had worked so hard for the past 2 years. 577. But the protagonists are not delighted that they started shouting at her. She immediately asked why then. They said to prove to them what she can do for the organization. The girl argues her action is this factor. 578. But the advisor doesn't give up and says that because of the girl in the organization there will be strife, because the boss is dead. And does she really think that Scrooge's people will leave things? 579. Then the protagonist says that the man should not worry about it, because she has already taken care of everything and that is why she came back so late. Hearing these words, and was even more surprised and asked what she had done. 580. Then the protagonist tells Ilya all her actions. According to her, after the counselor left, she immediately snapped Mario's neck. And there were a lot of guys who tried to fight her, but she took them all out. That's the reason for her late return, according to her. And because of that fight, her whole dress got dirty and she had to borrow this row. 581. Upon hearing this, Ilya was left speechless. Unlike the Sullivan, who looks rather incredulous, Ilya then asked his counselor how many people were in Mario Scrooge's house. 582. Then the counselor thought about it for a while and told his boss that if you think about it, there were more than 50 people in Mario Scrooge's house. 583. Upon hearing this stunning news, Ilya immediately got up from his seat and walked over to the girl and asked her if it was true that she had handled all the men who were guarding Mary. 584. Then, the slightly shy protagonist said that she just decided to try it, and it worked out. Hearing these words, Ilya started laughing very hard. 585. He started laughing so hard that tears of joy even began to show in his eyes. He could not stop his expressive laughter for a very long time. 586. But after a short time, the guy wiped the tears from his eyes and said that if all the residents of the Scrooge house were really killed, then this is a battle worth fighting to the end. 587. According to his advisor, who also decided to intervene in the conversation, everything should end quickly. And if the other organizations find out that they have broken the treaty, a major war is sure to break out. 588. But Ilya was not at all confused, and said that then they should arrange everything so that no one could guess that it was they who had overstepped the terms of the agreement that had been made between them. 589. Then the counselor agrees with his boss and says it's a very good idea. And in that case, he's going to make evidence for the advisory board. He says he's going to make everyone believe that Mario was the mastermind behind the accident. 590. Also, immediately after these words, he immediately hugged Blanche and told her that she was an excellent killer. He also said that as long as Blanche was with them, that they had no reason to worry. At this point, the girl squeezed his hand with 2 fingers. 591. But Ilya thought a little and said that the girl will not participate in this battle. Then, looking at the hand of his counselor in the place where the girl squeezed it with 2 fingers, he noticed that there was a bruise left. 592. Naturally, when the counselor heard that the girl would not participate in the war, he was very surprised and asked his boss, what was he thinking? Because a serious war was about to start. 593. Then Ilya looked at the main character and asked her if she had ever killed before. But then the girl said with surprise that such a thing had never happened in her life, and today it was her first time. 594. Naturally, when the counselor heard about this, he was very much frightened and surprised. He asked the girl if it was the first time she had ever done this, because she had killed more than 50 people at once on the first day. 595. But Ilya doesn't look completely surprised. He comes closer to the girl and asks how old she is, and then the protagonist says that she is only 17, and her birthday was January 18th. 596. Then Ilya smiled and said that it turns out that the girl is almost 2 years older than his son, Ricardo. At this moment, he stroked the main character on the head, from which she blushed a little. 597. Then he tells Blanche that the first murder is hard work, and children need not be so overworked. Immediately afterward, the man removed his hand from the girl's head, while she listened to him in amazement. 598. Then, a little brainstorming the main thing, asked Ilya whether they can win without her participation in the battle. Of course, the protagonist is not at all sure about it. 599. Then Ilya gently touched her nose and asked the girl not to be so presumptuous. According to him, if their society did not develop without the new man joining, they would not be able to reach this stage. 600. Then the counselor naturally supports his boss and says it's true, according to him, or he said it right. And she better take a break, because today was her first kill. 601. At this point, Blanche thinks about the fact that usually the person who kills for the first time is shocked. She realizes that maybe these people do care about her, but also at this time her status icon appears once again, which shows that there is a mistake with her morale. 602. Then, after a short thought, the girl said that she understood them from their thoughts, but she wondered what about Ricardo, at which point both men looked at each other and as if they were thinking. 603. Then Ilya looked at Blanche and said that when the war was over, he would let her meet Ricardo, at which time the counselor asked why she wanted to see him so badly. 604. Then the plan says she came here to be his subordinate, hearing these words, and was a little surprised and asked the girl if she really meant it. 605. At the same time, he notes that as his father, of course, he is a little embarrassed to say this, but Ricardo is much weaker than the protagonist, so he is surprised that she wants to come under his authority. 606. But then the protagonist says it doesn't matter because she still wants to be his subordinate, and the girl thinks about the fact that in 3 years this guy will not be the same as he is now. 607. Then the counselor looked at the protagonist, and after a little thought asks the girl if she would like to marry him instead of becoming his henchwoman. According to the counselor, 15 years old. This is a good age, and the age difference is not that big. 608. Or the counselor offers another option. If suddenly a girl would like a younger husband, according to him, Elijah has an adorable 11-year-old son named Giulio, then looked at his counselor and asked him, how can he sell someone's sons so cheaply? 609. Also, the counselor asked Blanche's permission to introduce her to the others. To do this, he asked that you girl followed him. 610. Then he took the protagonist to another room in the house and loudly told everyone that they should get to know each other better, at which point the protagonist was looking at some boy with fascination. 611. A little embarrassed boy got very embarrassed and said hello to the girl, then leaning over him a little, the girl in return said hello too. 612. She immediately asked the boy if he was the younger brother of Ricardo, whose name is Giulio. Then with surprise, the boy asked the girl if she knew his brother, and she said she did and she knew him a little bit. 613. So she also decided to ask the boy, where is his brother now? But the girl did not even have time to talk to the boy, as the counselor immediately summoned her to him. 614. He said he introduces her to those who will stay here beside her to protect the family home, He introduces and all the boys. One of them is named Tommy, the second Felix, the third Severo, 615. At this point, Oren called out to his counselor and told him that they should already be leaving. Naturally, the man obeyed his boss's order, and looking at the girl told her that they should all survive and see each other again. 616. Immediately after these words, the carriage with Ilya, the counselor, and others set off on a long journey. Then looking out the window, the girl wonders if Ricardo is really not here. 617. Suddenly it was time for victory, and then a very large table was set for them all, at which point the protagonist thought about the fact that here the boys only eat one meat. 618. But now it doesn't bother her much. And then she decided to ask her younger brother Ricardo if it's true that he doesn't live with him. And when the boy heard this question, he was a little surprised. 619. Then he began to talk about his brother, but almost before he had time to say a word, he suddenly noticed something strange in the window. Seeing this, the boy was very much frightened. 620. And shouted very loudly that everyone present should get down. Then the boy got under the table and started shaking and crying very hard, while the main character was just trying to understand what was going on and whether they were really attacked. 621. It turns out there were a huge number of people outside the window who were accusing Ilya of being a bloody stinking fool. Actually, there's a more foul word for it, but you can't do that on YouTube. 622. Then one of the guys started counting how many people were gathered outside their window. He counted 14 men. Then another one of them said that you can understand why they are so angry, because it is obvious that they were the first to break the peace treaty. Then the other one was a little wary of the whole situation, because according to him, only 3 of them can fight. 623. Then the protagonists came out from under the table and said that she too could fight, while people accused them of breaking the roof of their house. At that moment, one of the guys calls everyone outside the window cowardly dogs. After all, they only wanted to make sure that their family had no one to attack. 624. Then the main character decided to confess that it was her who broke their roof, but she emphasized that she did not do it on purpose because it was difficult to find a way out at night, so she looked for it upstairs when all the guys heard about it, a little surprised. 625. Then the main character remembered what had happened that night. Turns out she couldn't get out of the house and just flew upstairs, breaking the roof of Mario's house. 626. Then none of these guys believed that it was really a girl who did it. They think she has quite stupid jokes and still refuse to believe what she says. 627. But then the embarrassed protagonist said that she was not joking at all. At the same time, their conversation is interrupted by another arrow that flew through the window into their house. The people outside the window wanted to see Ilya and told him to stop doing nonsense and come out to them. 628. When they saw another arrow, the boys were very much frightened and asked what they should do. Then one of them said that he had better run away, for the 3 of them could not fight with so many people. 629. At this point, the very brave protagonist said that she would deal with everyone alone. Then the guys grabbed her and said that she was crazy and didn't understand why she stood up. They try to stop her, but the protagonist begs the guys to let her go. 630. Suddenly, one of the doors exploded, and then everyone turned around to see what happened. At that moment, some guy was entering the room. 631. He was with his subordinates and laughing, the protagonist seeing him a little surprised. But the guy looked at her, just wondered if she was really that lovely girl. 632. At that moment, his status window appears in front of the girl, and she sees that it's you guy's name is Germa, and he's pretty strong. Also, she notices a note that says that this guy has high moral values. 633. Then towering over everyone, the guy asks what this beautiful girl ate to be so pretty. At this moment, the protagonist looked right at him and smiled a little, thinking that a mobster who has 320 points of morality is quite strange and funny. 634. Then the protagonist went straight to the point and asked the guy if he was really the leader of the uninvited guests. Then he said he was right, and his name was Germa. According to him, he became the boss of the Campano family at the age of 19. 635. Then, a little embarrassed, the main character said that all these guys look pretty dirty, and she also noticed that they stink. 636. According to her, the guys that surround her in Ricardo's house are also a little dirty, but the ones that came here are on a whole other level. Naturally, at this point, all the guys that were in the house and were behind her back wondered if they were really dirty. 637. Approaching not from the guest's bathroom, she asked if it was true that they didn't shower because there was no running water at home, while she pointed out that there was hot water in Scrooge's house, naturally hearing these words. 638. And Blanche thinks about the fact that of course she realizes that plumbing is not easy to install in any house, especially if you have to spend a lot of money to install the equipment to have hot water, and also the time to install. 639. Immediately after that, she grabbed the ringleader's breasts and said that her house was getting dirty for them, so she suggested that they go outside and talk there, at which time she pulled the ringleader behind her. 640. Naturally confused guy asks the girl if she wants to give him the opportunity to go to the street on his own. But the main character does not answer anything, and then the guy starts to threaten her. He asks if she wants to die because if she does not let him go, she will be worse. 641. At this point, a system notification appears that Germ's high moral principles prevent him from attacking the girl right now, while at the same time, all of Germ's subordinates are watching him in amazement. 642. Then the guy turned to Blanche and said that he was leaving, so he asked if she could let him go right now. At which time the girl looked at him and seemed to be thinking about something. 643. Then she said she was ready to let him go. Then the embarrassed guy took a breath and asked his subordinates if they had checked the whole house. Then one of them said everything was clear and Ilya wasn't here. 644. Hearing this, the boss of these thugs started calling Ilya very bad words and said that he was a coward because he had left a baby and a girl in the house. 645. Then the completely unembarrassed protagonist reminds Germ that he said he would leave. Hearing these words, the man became very angry. 646. But in doing so, he turned to her and asked who said he wasn't going to leave. According to him, he just wanted to say goodbye to them normally. Suddenly the guy looked back and saw the danger. 647. Immediately after he sensed danger, he threw himself on top of the main character to cover her with his body and told her to be careful. Immediately after these actions, there was a huge explosion. 648. Because of the explosion, the main character together with Germo fell right on the floor. Because of this, the guy immediately ordered the girl to be quiet. He got up and went to the window to see what was going on there. 649. After he looked out the window, he reported that meanwhile people keep coming and coming to get even with Ilya. The angry people outside the window are calling Ilya very bad names and accusing him that the people who are under his command broke the roof of their hotel. 650. According to them today, all their families are declaring war on Giotto. At this time, the guy realizes that all the people are waiting outside for Ilya to come out to them so they can get even. 651. At that moment, Ricardo's younger brother looked directly at the protagonist and said that if from now on she would do the same thing, she would not give the real name of their family. The girl agrees and says that next time she will do exactly as the boy told her to do. 652. Hearing these words from Germo turned around in surprise and looked directly at Blanche. He asked, "Did this beauty really make all this mess?" 653. But the protagonist still behaves just as carelessly. She reminds the ringleader that he said he would get out of here right away. But the guy is not going to leave and says that if she really broke the roof, it would be better for her to escape. 654. Because according to him, not everyone is as polite as he is. Then the girl looked at him and said that was all she had to say to him. 655. Immediately after these words, the main character goes out into the street to all the disgruntled people. Naturally, they look at her with a smile and ask, "Who the girl?" 656. Then she said the Giotto family realizes the blame for what happened last night, and she also says she alone is responsible for it. 657. At this point, All the disgruntled people looking at the protagonist ask, "Is this brat?" and left this girl in his house and ran away. Other people immediately ask how she is going to repay them for the damage done to them. 658. They ask if she will pay them with money or with her body. At this point, the protagonist thinks a little bit and realizes that in the city she is in, there are no laws, and crime and betrayal happen every day. She obviously realizes that there is only one way to get absolute exemption from responsibility. 659. And then she declares that she is a candidate for the title of Queen of the City of Digitalis. It turns out that the throne of this city gives the opportunity to rule the weak and strong who are here. She also knows that this position is held only by the strongest. 660. It also appears that the king of this city cannot refuse a challenger for his seat, so he accepts the challenge, and a one-on-one duel will have to take place. 661. Then the protagonist sits down with the mafia boss who broke into their house on one horse and is about to leave somewhere. Then he asks why she doesn't want to escape. 662. For in his opinion, it did not matter how strong she was, for there was no way she could overpower his highness, at which point her horse had already reached the palace of the king of this city. 663. Then the king who sits on his throne eating an apple starts laughing at the sight of the protagonist. It turns out the king of this city is a very fat and ugly type. 664. Greedily devouring his apple, he talks about how when he found out there was someone vying to take his place, he didn't think it would be a babe like her. 665. See more variegated, he asks. Is it really the little lady challenges him? The great King Amerigo starting to taunt? The man says it would be nice if she would agree to do this battle in his bed. 666. Then the protagonist faces his strength. It turns out the strength of this man is equal to 300 units. Seeing this, the protagonist even thinks about it a little bit. 667. She realizes that this man's strength and magic are 300 points each, so she expects why he's yelling like that, and shows that he doesn't see the girl as a rival. 668. But also the protagonist obviously knows that thanks to the white dragon bracelet she stole, her magic power has increased, but she still needs more physical strength points, because even though her magic power is 405 and the enemy's is 300, he is physically stronger than she. 669. Then once again showing his underestimation, the king pecks a piece of apple right at the girl's feet and throws the rest of the apple away, at which time he says that since the girl is very pretty, he will give her a second chance to back off. 670. A man starts to intimidate the girl with all his might, and making a mean face asks her not to get into a fight, especially when he is her rival. Then the protagonist says she knows about it. 671. But at the same time, she continues to tease the man and decides to ask him an interesting question and asks us if it is true that he reads that he is now stronger than she is, with the girl laughing, saying 672. Then she asked the king where he got those apples from. Then a little thoughtful and surprised at the question, the king said nothing and asked, "Does the girl really want apples too?" 673. According to him, if she behaves well and is a good girl, he can give her some apples. Then the girl says she doesn't need anything from him and decides to open the game menu. 674. Then, after some action, she gets a system notification that her status has been saved, and a question asking her if she really wants to use 198 points to increase her physical strength. 675. Naturally, the protagonist chooses that she agrees to do it. Then, the king, in bewilderment, watched the girl, and noticing that she was just inserting her fingers through the air, asked what she was doing. 676. Then he asked her to stop drawing nonsense in the air and go fight him. The girl who came here to do just that said she was ready to do. 677. Immediately afterward, taking a few steps toward the king, she saw him immediately come and stand before her, ready to take the battle. Naturally, at this point, the man still looked as arrogant as he had before. 678. But then, the girl decided to strike the first blow. Naturally, the king did not take her intentions seriously and just put his hand in front of him as a defense. Thinking that the girl did not possess any strength, he still smiled and thought that the battle would be easy. 679. But suddenly his look changed. And all because the main character with her blow pierced through the king? Of course he could not think that this could happen. 680. Because her blow was too strong, it left a hole in the king. Also, because of this hole, he started spitting out blood and fell to the ground, while the protagonist towered over him. 681. At this time, all the people who had gathered to watch the king once again defeat someone who had decided to swear to his throne were watching in amazement, as was the young man who had been in the house earlier. 682. Naturally, the king's servants were also very much surprised, but then the protagonist, being just as emotionless, looked at them and asked if she had correctly realized that they and the families of the Miele. 683. Then, as if a little embarrassed, she asked where their boss bought apples this season. The guys were naturally very surprised, and a little trembled with fear, but said that their boss did not buy anything because they have their own greenhouse. 684. Hearing this news, the protagonist began to smile as if rejoicing. Right after that, after some time, the action is transferred back to Ilya's house. 685. At this point, the protagonist is eating apples that were picked in the greenhouse and sees system notifications that her reputation has improved significantly. At which point, Ilya enters the house with his advisor. 686. Naturally, Ilya immediately asked questions of interest and asked if the protagonist really killed Amerigo, at which time a more agitated counselor asks the protagonist what it is. 687. At this point, Germo stands in front of the protagonist and asks Ilya and his counselor how dare they address Blanche without a title. He reminds them that the girl should now only be addressed as Your Highness. 688. Then Ilya looked at the guy in surprise and asked who he was and why he was right now in their family home. Then the guy decided to introduce himself. 689. And he told Ilya that his name was Germo, and at 19 he had already started to rule the Campano clan, and today he was also Miss Blanche's subordinate. The other guy behind his back said that Germo is the one who steals goods from the stock kingdom and sells them. 690. Then Ilya realizes who is in front of him and says that once this guy was a smuggler of mushrooms. At this point, hearing about mushrooms, the main characters, and a little surprised and thinks that it may be some slang, and under mushrooms and meant illegal drugs. 691. But then Ilya dispels all the main character's thoughts and says that what he says is true and that this guy is exporting natural cotton mushrooms from the stock kingdom because it is forbidden to export them there. 692. At this point, Germo was speechless and even blushed a little. The protagonist herself looked at him and realized that he was behaving exactly as expected of a man with 320 points of ethics. 693. But the guy was still very angry and asked Ilya not to look down on him because he is much richer than Ilya. At which point, one of the guys who works in the house intervenes and says that Germo is lying because he is the guy who lives in the basement and smuggles mushrooms. 694. Then Germo starts to justify you and says it's all because freaks like Ilya took all the normal stuff. He also asks why he can't choose something other than mushrooms, at which point the counselor continues to mock him and asks if the guy is really exporting them. 695. Suddenly they all hear someone from outside calling Blanche. They address her as Queen, and then it turns out that these guys are servants of the past king. They beg Blanche to become their queen and head their organization. They try to convince her that in their greenhouse there are many more fruits that may appeal to her highness. 696. Then the counselor told Ilya that if Blanche really did kill the former king, then the property of the Miele family would now be transferred to her. Then Ilya remarked that if so, in any case the Miele family would try to keep Blanche. 697. Then Ilya decided to ask the protagonist if she has thought about what she will do next. But Blanche, calmly eating an apple, said that she is not interested in the affairs of the family because despite what happened, she is still a member of the family Giotto, Then surprised, Ilya asks if it is true that she will therefore still become Ricardo's subordinate. 698. Then she decides to talk to the men about the fact that the former king's property is now in her possession. The girl remarks that this is quite nice because she now has a job. 699. A short time later, the protagonist was already enthroned on the throne of the king, with the beautiful golden crown in her hands, and Ilya and his counselor and one of the king's former subordinates standing beside. 700. Then the protagonist addresses the crowd and says that she is aware that they are all unhappy about what happened last night, and that is why she, the person who is the new queen, will take action to punish the Giotto family. 701. Naturally, hearing the words of punishment, the counselor was very much surprised, because earlier in the rhetoric of the girl there was no such thing. But then suddenly Blanche said that she orders everyone to burn down the house of the Giotto family in 2 days. Naturally, hearing about it, the counselor was even more surprised. 702. Naturally, all the people who were there were very surprised, including even those who surrounded her. At this point, the counselor was very indignant and asked Blanche if she was not crazy, but then the girl said that this is not all. Food, to be honest, I feel a little sorry for this old man. Because for a couple of days of acquaintance with the protagonist, he has stress points increased by several times. 703. The protagonist says that in addition to punishing the Giotto family, she will also open the doors of the treasury of the Miele family, and now this treasury will be available to everyone. 704. She asks that people not be shy and take whatever they want, and if someone takes the gem first, they need to show no respect and just have it stolen. 705. Smiling and looking at all the people who have gathered, the main character said that she wants chaos. She looks like she is saying it really seriously. 706. Then the action is moved forward another 2 days, at which point the house of the Giotto family is already on fire. This fire is watched by Vetnik, with tears in his eyes. 707. It turns out that there is a commotion around him, because everyone is moving their family's things to another house, while the counselor is very upset about what he sees, because in that house, their story happened. 708. And Germo, who is also in that room, is laughing hard at what's going on. He says that all the crazies in this town must be watching the treasure fight. 709. But the counselor finally finds some positives in what's going on. He says that, moreover, Blanche has held a crushing victory over the former king, and no one is coming to attack them anytime soon. 710. Then Agermo says that everything happens like that. As expected from his girl, he is very much attracted by her strength and inexplicable atmosphere around her. According to the guy, it is very sexy. 711. At this point, the counselor clenches his fist and gets very annoyed, but admits that they have solved the war problem they were so worried about. But he still doesn't understand why the family house needs to be burned down. 712. He asked Blanche directly about it, and then the protagonist, who is already in a robe, said that one of the members of the organization had harmed the entire town. So that should be enough to make everyone calm down. 713. Then the counselor says that he heard that she was the one who did what everyone was angry about. And besides, she became king and has the right not to take responsibility for it. 714. Naturally, the protagonist says that the counselor is completely right and she knew about it. But then the man starts crying even harder and asks, then why did she do it? Well, then the girl argued that the Scrooge family house has hot water, and their house did not have it. 715. Naturally, the counselor got very angry when he heard this argument and asked the girl if he understood correctly that this was the reason why she decided to burn down their house. Then the girl said that they stink a lot and they should take a shower. 716. At this point, Germo submits to his queen and says he'll take a bath right now, while Ilya doesn't look at all delighted with what's going on and is just thinking about something. 717. After a short thought, he told Blanche that he wanted to talk to her about something to discuss their business. Then they go to Elijah's office. 718. There, the boss informed Blanche that Ricardo had been captured by Count Juan. Naturally, hearing about it, she was very much surprised. And then looking at the main character, Ilya decided to tell her the whole story. 719. According to the man, 10 years ago the Count got very rich on the money borrowed from him. But 2 months ago, Ricardo, who visited him to collect the interest and principal accrued since then, did not return. 720. It was because of this that Ilya made special conditions for whoever would rescue his son. Turns out he put a huge monetary reward or condition that they would become members of their family. But in the end, still, no one was able to free his son. 721. According to the father, they can't even find out if his son is alive or not. Then excited Blanche asked Ilya not to worry. All Ricardo is not so weak to just take and die, but at the same time the girl thinks that she will have to kill him in 3 years. 722. But then Ilya interrupts her thoughts and says that if she so much wants to become his subordinate, why not try to save him from the clutches of the Count? But the protagonist is a little surprised by this proposal and said that she just does not want to do it. Naturally, Ilya was shocked by 723. Looking with wonder directly at the protagonist, he asked why she was against it, but then about to leave and offered a reward for saving her son. And that's why someone is bound to show up, and she will wait in the meantime. 724. At the same time, the protagonist thinks that in any case, even if she doesn't save Ricardo, he will eventually come back here and become the king of this city. She is very much annoyed, but she doesn't tell her thoughts to Ilya and just asks him if it's true what he wanted to talk about. And if it is, she's going to leave. 725. At this point, Ilya just thought a bit and realized that if there is such an arbitrary person, it is impossible to control the whole organization. While in any case, he realizes that if she is just going to follow his son, it would be better if he took drastic measures. 726. And then the man says that if the girl decides to act in this way, she will be excluded from the Giotto family, of course. Hearing this, the protagonist was surprised and immediately turned to the man. 727. And said that she already knows how to fit into their society perfectly well. But at the same time, he thinks that whether she returns Ricardo or not, it is better not to leave her here. 728. According to him, it is very important even if it is only because of the discipline of the organization. Then the protagonist did not answer anything, because she was left literally speechless by such news. 729. Then the action moves to the next day. It turns out the counselor is very much surprised that Blanche is actually leaving them, at which point he even calls his boss Ilya crazy. 730. Then Germo intervenes in their conversation and says that he has thought it over carefully, and the people of the Giotto family are really out of their minds. He asks that the girl forget about the Giotto family and join him. 731. Then looking directly at the guy, the girl asked who he was and remarked that she was very much blinded by the sun. Naturally, the guy was very much surprised to hear this and reminded her that he was a Germo and asked if it was true that she didn't recognize him after the shower. 732. At this moment, she is called by her younger brother Ricardo and asked to wait a moment. Then the boy strives towards the girl, and after he has reached her, they begin to gaze at each other. 733. Then the boy hands the protagonist some pendant and asks her to take it. The girl naturally asks what it is, and then she hears that it's a relic from the boy's mom, and if she shows it to Ricardo, he'll believe she's from the Giotto family. 734. At the same time, the counselor asked the girl to take his gift. He tells her that it is a magical talisman's drafts from the magic tower, which were made by the best craftsmen of this city. According to him, it will be useful for her if she needs to hide her identity. 735. Germo also decided to say goodbye to the girl, and putting his jacket on her, said that if she really had to go, let her wear this. The guy asks her to always remember to wear warm clothes. 736. Then Blanche, lowering her gaze a little, says to Germo that if it works out, she is ready to meet him again. At the moment when the girl is leaving, everyone says goodbye to her and asks her to take care of herself. They tell her to come back for sure, because they will be waiting for 737. As she leaves, The girl thinks that if she is kicked out of the Giotto family, the returning Ricardo will still consider her a rival, which she really doesn't want to. 738. At this time, the action moves to the palace of the Marquis, where the maids are walking along the corridor and talking about how sorry they are for Marietta, because she cannot do anything about such a luxurious wedding. After all, the groom Count Juan, 739. One of the maids says that she finds it amazing that they can work like this because of the lavish wedding, but the video that the girl who followed her, but did not react to these words, the girl got angry and said that she should also be grateful, because if it was not for the wedding not with Marietta, she would never have such a job. 740. Then we see the face of the same girl with whom the maid was talking, and it turns out that it is Blanche, but with some changes in appearance. Because of these changes, one of the maids starts to bitch at the main character and says that it is the first time she sees a girl with such an ugly face as hers. 741. According to another maid, if Lady Marietta sees Irene, she will go mad. Then the girl asks if she should go and bring rice to the prisoners in the cellar instead of going to the wedding. For those who don't understand, Irene is the name the maid used to cover herself. 742. When one of the maids heard about it, she was very much surprised. She asked why she was going into the dungeon and wondered if the girl was going to give the prisoners medicine again. According to the maids, this freak should take better care of herself than of the prisoners, and they ask the girl to do what they ask her to do, and nothing unnecessary. 743. It turns out last night she managed to get into the dungeon and then she met Ricardo. According to the girl, to get into the dungeon was not difficult at all. She used a stew with a sleeping potion, because its effect was used to make the guard fall asleep. 744. Then the protagonist passed by him and successfully managed to sneak into the dungeon. After going in there, the protagonist still found River Orda behind one of the bars. 745. She tried for quite a long time to draw the guy's attention to herself, and when she succeeded, the protagonist so touched her fingers to his forehead. Suddenly the guy screamed and moved away from the bars, asking the protagonist to get out of here. 746. He was so scared of her that tears started to appear on his face, and he covered his face with his hands, seeing that the girl didn't react much. He even asked her if she could hear him. 747. It turns out that the other maids are not in love with the main character because of her actions. Even the other maids have been reprimanded. But the girl does not care, and she just thinks that thanks to him, she had to drug all the guards and put them to sleep. 748. Then, in order not to send the girl to the dungeon again, the other maids gave her a pile of things to go and wash. According to one of the maids, there is Lady Marietta's dress in those things, and if the girl can't clean it tomorrow, she'll be in trouble and not be reprimanded. It would be better if the girl just starved to death. 749. The other maids noticed that the protagonist was not eating anything and approached her to ask if she was all right. But they did not notice that the girl was refusing to eat, and that is why they offered to share bread with her. 750. But the protagonist refused this gesture of good-naturedness and informed everyone that she was fine, at which time there was a system notification that PB and Agatha sympathized with her. 751. The protagonist naturally mentally thanks the maids for showing her mercy, but she also remarks that he is expected to eat this soft bread. 752. It turns out all because of the fact that her inventory is completely full of all sorts of goodies, such as smoked pork leg at that moment. While the girl hides behind the wall the other maids tried to understand why the place smells so strange. 753. Anyway, Blanche realizes that she won't be able to finish her work until late at night, so she asks the other maids not to wait for her and to go to bed first. 754. Then the girl put on her sister's dress and decided to go into the dungeon. Of course, the guards at first did not realize who was there, but then saw their newfound mistress. But it was just a deceptive maneuver from Blanche, who was a twin with Marietta. 755. Then the girl said that she had some things to do, so she would go away for a while. Of course, the guard could not say anything and agreed with the girl, But then, Blanche asked him for the keys. 756. When the guard heard about it, he was very much surprised and asked about the keys. But then the girl started to behave like her elder sister and asked his guard how he dared to behave arrogantly with her. Naturally, the guard was very much frightened and apologized and handed over the keys to the girl. 757. Then, taking the keys from the guard, the protagonist again went to the dungeon of Cricard. After she entered there, the girl saw the same exhausted guy who was lying on his prison bed. 758. Having looked carefully at the guy, the girl made an inference that he looks handsome and bright. Because of this, she became very interested to see how one of the main characters of this game lives. Also, she is pleased that he does not scream, and in general does not react to her presence. 759. Then she decided to open Ricardo's status card, and saw that he was quite shabby. And she also noticed that his stress was 99, and there was a note that his stress points had reached the limit, 760. Naturally, she was very embarrassed by the high stress level. She thought it might be because the guy was locked up, so after looking at the guy for a while, she decided to help him. 761. In this girl should have been helped by the lantern Idis. It turns out it was used by the girl sharpening the blade to take revenge on her husband at the lighthouse in the Cretan Sea. For 10 minutes of using this item, the character's stress level is reduced by 1.000 units, 762. Then the protagonist still decided to use the Idis lantern, and suddenly very beautiful particles appeared around them. The girl also looked at this effect with surprise, and then a system notification popped up that the stress liquidity is gradually decreasing due to the action of the lantern. 763. Then the guy's stress began to decrease exponentially, and when his stress reached 700 points, he looked at the main character and asked her who she was. Then the girl did introduce herself to him and told him that she had come here to save him. 764. And in order to make the guy believe that she is really here without bad intentions, she showed him the amulet that was given to her by the younger brother of the guy. Seeing this amulet, tears appeared in Ricardo's eyes, and he finally woke up. 765. Then he still took the amulet from the girl and cried very much happy, because he thought that it was her father who sent her to save him. Then the protagonist began to refuse from it, but the guy was already unstoppable. 766. He started crying even more and started begging her to release him. Then the protagonist looked at the keys and decided to try to do it, but the guy said that these keys will not open the lock. 767. According to him, only Giacomo has the keys to the handcuffs that shackle him. Then the protagonists asked the trembling guy, "Who is Giacomo?" 768. Then the guy told the protagonist that this man is the right hand of the Count. Speaking about it, you can see that the guy is in a lot of pain because he is shaking and crying with his eyes closed. 769. According to Ricardo, the Count's right hand comes to him periodically, and then something terrible happens, at which point he sees this man in front of him as if in reality with a whip in his hands. 770. Then the protagonist said that she understood what she had to do, and asked Ricardo not to tell her everything. After all, she does not have time to listen to the details, at which point she gets up and decides to go look for the keys to his handcuffs. 771. Seeing that the protagonist is about to leave, the guy grabbed her hand and asked her not to leave him here alone. He begged her not to leave, and still shaking and crying looked straight at her. 772. But Blanche still decided to calm him down a little and noted that she did not say that she was going to leave him here. Then she used the Union's physical strength to break the shackles on the guy's hands, which naturally surprised him very much. 773. Having finally released the streams, the guy looked at his hands and redness that appeared like this, but the protagonist, just smiling, said that she had to try hard for him. 774. Then there was a system notification that Ricardo's stress level had increased significantly. Then the girl realized that if she teased him just once more, she might be in big trouble. 775. Then, looking at the guy, she asked him if he could get up and walk on his own, And right after that, Ricardo decided to try it. But he failed, and the guy immediately fell to his knees in front of the girl. 776. Then the protagonist noticed that the guy's strength had dropped a lot, and noticing this, she told him not to work too hard, and told him that it would be better if they waited a little longer, and then got out of here. 777. But Ricardo doesn't agree with it at all because according to him, there is no time because Giacomo should come soon. Speaking of the Count's right hand, the guy's stress level increased again, and then he even turned his back to the girl. She herself was shocked that his stress level was increasing back so quickly. 778. Deciding to calm Ricardo, she put her hands on his shoulders and said that everything would be fine. According to her, Kraft's right hand would not come to him again ever again. And then the guy asked her incredulously how she could be sure of that. 779. Blanche answered him after all, and told him that it was because she would do anything to make it just as she said, after which she took the lad's hands and swore that he would never again experience the awful feelings he usually had at the sight of the Count's right hand. 780. Starting to trust Blanche, the guy looked at her with amazement, as suddenly there was a loud sound. Then, in the hands of the girl appeared food, and she asked him if he liked smoked pig's feet. Of course, the guy could not say anything and just almost drowned in drool. 781. At this time, it was already snowing outside, and the maids were still humiliating the main character. One of them said that the girl was ugly and asked how she dared to look down on her, but the girl did not seem to care at all, and she only thought that if she killed Giacomo, Ricardo's stress would go down. 782. Suddenly, the Marquis himself came to the noise with a gun in his hand. Then the maid began to justify herself and said that this brat was too arrogant and insolent, so she brings her up. According to the maid, they must remind her of the favor the Marquis did her and let her work here, even though she is so ugly. 783. So yes, the Marquis looked at Blanche with surprise, and noted mentally that she had a rather ugly face, but at the same time he immediately noticed that her eye color and hair color were the same as Blanche's. Then he wondered if it was possible that this maid was his daughter. 784. Suddenly, the Marquis is distracted from his thoughts by the Count. He asks his Casey whether his maids have given any inconvenience to the Marquis, and then the Marquis says that nothing of the sort has happened, and he just suddenly remembered his dead daughter. At the same time, the Marquis himself thought that it was impossible, and he must have been mistaken about the girl. 785. Then the Count remarked that this maid must be about the same age as his dead daughter, and then he asked his Kesti if that was why he was so upset to see her. 786. Seeing the Marquis police that this was indeed the case, the Count decided not to hesitate, and dismissed all three maids who were abusing Blanche. He also ordered his right-hand man to take good care of this girl, so that his father-in-law would not be upset. 787. Then the protagonist was very happy that she had finally seen the very Giacomo that Ricardo was talking about, at which time the right-hand man suggested that he would let her work as one of his personal maids. 788. Then the Count looked at the Marquis and said that he hoped that from now on he would no longer strain himself and just take care of his living daughter. According to the Count, the happy wedding day was coming up, and he should be happy about it. 789. But the protagonist only thinks that if she becomes Giacomo's maid, it will be easier for her to kill him. But she wonders what kind of death she can think up for him. 790. At this time, the guy in the basement is eating and gaining strength. He looks up and remembers the terrible moments he experienced here. He remembered the right hand beating him while he was in confinement. 791. Then Giacomo mocked him very much and asked him to look at him with his pretty eyes. It turns out the image of the Count's right hand smirking and calling the guy by his father's name can't get out of his head. Remembering it even makes him shake. 792. But at the same time, he is very much reassured by the fact that now Giacomo will not come to him again. He is so sure of it. Because Blanche promised him. 793. Then, wrapped in a blanket, he remembered the very moment when he first saw the beautiful Blanche in front of him. The picture of how beautiful the girl looked at that moment cannot leave the guy's mind. 794. After a short time, the action moves to the Count's office. He is informed that all 5 of his future wife's maids have quit. He asked his assistant about it, and he confirmed the information. According to the right hand, as the wedding ceremony approaches, the young lady's hysteria is increasing. Giacomo thinks that the maids could not stand it. 795. Naturally, the Count is very excited about this news. He has noticed that his fiancée is getting married without maids, and it may affect his reputation. But his assistant doesn't calm him down and says that the wedding is in 5 days, so it will be hard to find someone. But he still has a plan. 796. The action is immediately transferred to Marietta's room. The girl is once again hysterical and asks what this garbage is and whether the maid assigned to her is a human being. 797. Then another maid says that this girl is Sir Giacomo's maid. The game inn sent her to take care of Marietta urgently. Then she was very much surprised that it was the Count who sent the maid here. Blanche herself was thinking that she should make her sister calm down because she is busy with the murder of the right hand. 798. Because of this, her sister calmed down a little and looked at her new maid. She said that if she had such a monster by her side, her beauty would become even more noticeable against the Blanche. 799. The girl even asked about it to her brother, who is also present here. But her brother, as if has already come to his senses, and just asked his sister to think about how the girl feels at these words. But Marietta is outraged by this behavior of her brother and asks when it suddenly began to bother him. 800. Having decided to answer this question, the guy remembered about his sister Blanche. But even before finishing his thought, the elder sister immediately hit the table and reminded that she had already asked her brother not to mention this name in front of her. 801. It turns out that Marietta still blames Blanche for all her failures. But at that moment, the Marquis enters the room and notices that he can hear his daughter's voice all the way down the hall. 802. Then the girl turns to her father in tears, while the Marquis approached Blanche. But the girl immediately decided to tell him that her name was Irene, and from today, she would serve his daughter. 803. Hearing the voice of her maid, the mistress immediately became excited. She noticed that her voice was very similar to Blanche's, and she asked her father to take a closer look at her hair color, eyes, and body shape, which also matched Blanche. 804. Then the father was very indignant at the words of his daughter and said that the plan cannot be. But Marietta still refuses to believe it and asks her father because, in her opinion, it was he who let her go. Because if he had really tried to catch her, then he would have caught her. 805. Seeing his daughter's agitation, her father decides to calm her down and tells her to forget about the dead and just take care of her wedding. But the girl once again becomes hysterical and says that she doesn't want a marriage of convenience. 806. Then the Marquis decided to put his eldest daughter in her place and asks her to look around, and then asks her if she sees her third prince here. Hearing these words, the girl starts crying and shaking again and asks the Marquis, how can he say that? 807. She asks her father not to talk about the prince in front of her. At this time, the maid is approached by Alfred, who scrutinizes her. But Blanche does not seem to be bothered by this. She thinks that after all, it seems that the prince has abandoned her as she thought. 808. It appears that Alfred approached the maid to get to know her, and after he did, he asked her to go outside with him to get some fresh air. 809. Suddenly, while they are walking around the castle and heading outside, someone calls out the Marquis's youngest son. It turns out to be the Count's right-hand man, who comes closer. Ask the boy if he really decided to watch the castle. 810. And also asked permission to join him. Naturally, the boy did not object, unlike the protagonist who had a stronger feeling of hatred for this man. 811. In her opinion, it would be very difficult for this year to visit Ricardo unnecessarily. After a short time, the action moved to the guy's dungeon, where he looks anxiously at the entrance to his cell. 812. He is very frightened because he hears some footsteps. He even starts shaking and biting his nails. And after he hears the door open, there are even tears in his eyes. 813. Naturally expecting to see his probation officer here, he covered his ears and looked away. But then it turned out that he had once again been blessed, as the girl had informed him. 814. Naturally, the guy was very happy to see Blanche instead of his probation officer in this place. Then he moved a little closer to her, after which the girl asked him how he was feeling. 815. But the guy didn't answer her anything. Just walked up to the main character and hugged her tenderly. He felt really happy, because he was able to calm down. 816. Then, looking directly into the eyes of the protagonist, he told her that he was waiting for her very much. At this moment, tears appeared in the eyes of the guy again, and the girl looked directly at him in bewilderment. 817. Then the protagonist once again asked the young man how he was feeling, and this time he decided to answer her, and said that he was fine, while he very much wants them to leave here right now, at which time the girl decided to open his status in order to understand how he felt. 818. Then looking at his card, she saw that his stress level is much lower than it was the first time, and his strength has increased slightly, while he looks much better than he did the first time. 819. But the girl asked him to give her a look at him, because in her opinion he doesn't look quite healthy. The protagonist is confused that when she was at level 1 and her strength was 50 points, unlike him who has 48 points of strength so far. 820. Then the guy interrupted her from her thoughts and asked if the girl was in a good mood, and asked if she wanted to look at the lights with him. Hearing this, the protagonist looked at the lantern and saw that she only had 5 uses of the lantern left. 821. Then she agreed to look at the lights with the guy, but she said that the energy was low, so he could only use it 5 times. She said he should only use it when he really needed to. 822. Then, looking directly at the lantern, the guy hesitated a bit and said with embarrassment that if there wasn't much use left, he wanted to look at it with her. At this point, he even took the girl's hand. 823. After that, they both sat on the bed and began to watch how beautifully the lights were developing around them. Ricardo could not stand the silence and asked the girl how her life was going, and then he heard the answer that the girl was always busy. But at the same time, she asked if the jailer had come to the boy. 824. Smiling and very happy, the guy says that Giacomo didn't come to see him. Further, Blanche says it looked like they had a lot of free time, so she secretly ripped up half the tax papers and burned them. She thinks it's likely these guys will be busy again. 825. Finally, Ricardo realized that she had something to do with him living peacefully after all. But Blanche says that if the assistant had nothing to do, he might as well show Alfred the treasure chest. At that moment, the guy awed and the girl asked in surprise what happened. 826. But Ricardo remained calm and said it was nothing and he was just thinking about why he came to see the Count. Then looking at Blanche, he asked if his family had already lost the war. 827. The girl didn't answer anything and just looked at him in surprise. The guy took this gesture as confirmation that his family had lost and started blaming himself for what had supposedly happened. According to him, it was all his fault, and he should have gotten the money and gone back and forth. 828. Finally, the protagonist remembered why the guy was here. Then Ricardo started crying again and asked the girl if everything had really happened. Funny, according to him, he is coming around again, and worried about the money he didn't get. 829. At the same time, he realizes that his body is still in a terrible condition, so he has no chance of escaping from here. At this point, the girl does not answer her, just thinking for a while, decides to tell him that it is not so. 830. She tells Ricardo that she will try to help him in any way she can, and then the guy looked at Blanche with eyes full of gratitude. At that time, a wonderful idea came into the girl's head. Jana wondered why she had not thought of it before. 831. It turns out she's thinking that if she's here anyway, so why doesn't she go and clean out the treasury at the Marquis's mansion, at which point there's a slight digression from the plot, and we learn the benefit of stealing Count Juan's treasure chest. 832. The whole point is that the girl thinks that the bag of gold will be a great object to slap Ilya, And she is also very happy that if all the money of the Marquis is lost, her family will also be at the bottom. And the girl is also warmed by the thought that she will become very rich. 833. She also remembered that it would soon be quiet, and at this time of year, dungeons would randomly appear all over the continent, and then the monsters that would come out of there would wreak havoc. 834. According to the girl's plan, she uses the Count's money to make a real army out of the Giotto family, at the head of which she herself will sit down and rule everything. 835. Moreover, she can then safely give the whole city into the hands of the protagonist Anastasia, and then by doing so the girl can save herself from death and the life that was destined for her. 836. Seeing Blanche's satisfied face, the guy turns to her and asks if she is cold. Thus, he interrupted her from her thoughts, but at the same time he still gave her the blanket with which he was covered, and asked the girl to put the blanket on herself. 837. Then suddenly, the guy together with Blanche noticed that he had an unexpected reaction, all because Ricardo had an erection. Naturally, he immediately tried to justify himself, but the protagonists said nothing and just smiled a little. 838. She immediately gave Ricard some more food so that he would not be hungry and could recover faster. After he started to eat, looking at the girl, Ricard noticed that he felt very warm. 839. Then the two maids who had been doing mercy for Blanche were officially employed. They thanked the girl for her help in this, because according to them, they could now send money to their families for living. 840. Naturally, Blanche is happy that she was able to help these kind girls, but she is also a little upset because if she has roommates, it will be difficult to visit Ricardo. 841. After a while, the girls sat down on the bed beside the girl and asked her if she had not become the personal servant of the right hand, at which time Blanche said that she had not, but they retorted that they were saying that Sir Giacomo was the Count's most faithful man, and it was probably with him that the Count had shared the key to the treasure. 842. Hearing this, the girl asked if it was true, and immediately she remembered the moment when she was in front of the doors to Don Juan's treasury. 843. It turns out that this is the treasury of the moneylender Juan, in which is stored all the accumulated wealth of the Don. Also, the girl saw that in order to access the vault, she needs 2 keys, and the ability to magical protection of their physical is equal to 500 units. At this point, the girl realized that perhaps it was about the same 2 keys that are kept by the Count and his assistant. 844. At this time, the maids ask her how the escorting of the lady to the wedding is going and if everything is going well, but the protagonist does not react to this because she only thinks about the treasure. At this time in the office of the moneylender, there is chaos, because he noticed that half of the tax reports have disappeared. 845. The Count does not understand how this is possible, because he was busy preparing for the wedding. At that moment, his assistant tries to get out of it somehow, and calling the Count dear says that in any case it is very suspicious, because few people can get into his room. Then Kraft asked whether his assistant has already found out whether he could do it too. 846. Then Giacomo says that maybe the new maid did it, and he of course tries to find out all about this girl named Irene. 847. Then the action is moved forward some time, and Pierre communicates with his sister. He says that tomorrow is her wedding day, with which he congratulates her. Naturally, hearing another reminder of this, Marietta looks not very happy and even more tense than it was before. 848. Then Pierre asks if she is still angry with him. Naturally, the girl asks if she looks like a person who is angry, but she also tells her maid not to make tea for her brother. 849. Naturally, take the girl along with the priest, who also came to visit her a little sad and for her behavior. But suddenly the priest paid attention to the maid. Seeing this, girl asked what confused the pry. 850. Then coming closer to the maid, the priest asked if her name was Irene. He noticed that she had a huge scar on her face, and noting that he was a medical officer, said that he knew about burns, because that was his specialty. 851. But Blanche tries to get out of it and says she doesn't need any help because she's not in pain anymore. But the priest insists and says that if she refuses because she doesn't have any money, He can assure her that all his services are absolutely free. Then Pierre also intervenes in their conversation and says that the priest is just very worried and girls don't ask for money. 852. At this point, Blanche wonders what she should do to avoid the priest's help. Suddenly, system notifications pop up that her stress level has risen, but suddenly Marietta screams and forbids her to help her maid in any way. 853. She immediately went to Blanche and said that if she was treated for the burn, she would immediately throw the girl out of the castle of the Count. Then the protagonist finally, for the first time, glad for the bad behavior in her sister, and thought that turns out her sister is also sometimes useful. 854. But Pierre and the priest stand on the girl's side and ask her not to be angry with the maid and for them, and the priest begs the girl to think again about his proposal. 855. Then the protagonist prayed that her sister would not change her mind, and Mary naturally followed this expectation. She asked the boys if it was wrong that she wanted others to notice her beauty. She said she needed a monster by her side to do so. 856. Hearing these words, Pierre shows with all his appearance that he is dissatisfied with his sister's behavior. But then tears come to the girl's eyes, and she says that now she has nothing left. According to her, even the dream of becoming a crown princess and the noble name of the Marquis's daughter was taken away from her. 857. So now she has only one thing left to do, and that is to be beautiful always, no matter who she is compared to. She must be the best, because that's all she has left. So the nerves of the girl even throws the mug on the floor, from which it naturally breaks. 858. Immediately after this performance, the elder sister simply turns away and walks away, leaving her maid alone with her brother and the priest. Then the priest says that in his opinion, it is better to leave the elder sister alone. Immediately after these words, Pierre turns to the maid and dares to speak to her. 859. Pierre told the maid that he was sorry because his sister had become more nervous as she was about to get married. But Blanche said it was all right, and decided to pick up the mug that had broken. Unexpectedly, she accidentally cut her finger because of it. 860. Seeing this, the priest immediately asked the girl's permission to help her, and then he once again used his power to heal her. 861. But suddenly the protagonist, without waiting for the end of the procedure, pulled her hand out of the priest's grip and said that she didn't need help because she was fine. 862. Then looking more closely at the girl with the priest, suddenly shouted the name Blanche. Hearing this name, Pierre was very much surprised and asked what his friend was talking about and why he suddenly shouted this name. 863. Then the priest explains his act and says that Pierre himself knows what happens when the holy power touches people. According to him, then everyone will have an electromagnetic wave that absorbs it differently, and he noticed that the electric wave he felt from the hands of this maid is the same as Blanche. 864. Then the Marquis entered the room, who was naturally surprised to hear these words, and asked the priest to redo what he had just said. Looking directly at the maid, the Marquis asked if the girl was really his daughter. 865. Not hearing an answer, he asked the maid once again if she was really his daughter, but then the girl said that she was not at all, and just thought that now she must rob the treasury and immediately escape from here, together with Ricardo. 866. At this point, while walking around the castle, the eldest of the sisters wonders if the maid assigned to her is a spy for the Count, who is giving him all the information about her. 867. Suddenly the girl saw the Count communicating with his assistant. Then the Count's right hand says that the maid looks like a sent spy from Digitalis. 868. Naturally, the Count was a little surprised at this news, but then his right hand decided to prove that they were lying, and said that from the results of the investigation, he had learned that the burn was just a fake, using a device invented in that city. According to him, it was possible to disguise a person as if his skin had been burned. 869. At this point, the eldest of the sisters is incredibly shocked, for she realizes that if her maid's burns are indeed fake, then there is only one person who will try so hard to get close to her. 870. But the Count has other things on his mind. He is more concerned that if this maid is really from that city, then she was sent here by Ilya. Immediately the Count asks his assistant, "Where is Ilya's son now, and if he has not run away?" 871. Then Giacomo says he's going to go check on the guy right now. Right before he's about to leave, someone responds to him, and turning around, the guy sees the Count's future bride in front of him. 872. Then Marietta, without going round and round, immediately asks about the girl who is her maid, and wonders if she is in any way connected with the boy they were talking about. Then the Count's right-hand man says frankly that she, 873. At this point, Marietta says that she also found out that this girl had worked at their mansion when they were younger, and a kitchen fire burned her face off and she quit. But she had no way of knowing that she would meet her again at the mansion. 874. Naturally, the Count and his assistant are very much surprised at the fact that the burns may be real. But then the Count's incredulous assistant whispers in his ear that he doesn't know if what the Count's future wife says is true. 875. It turns out that Marietta started lying, because if this maid is really her sister, she can't just be sent away, because if her face looks exactly like Blanche's, then things might turn out differently. 876. It turns out that the older sister's plan is to put her younger sister Blanche in her place on her wedding night, so that she can sleep with Count Juan instead of her. 877. She thinks that if everything works out exactly this way, then her secret will also remain unsolved, while the girl is holding on to her stomach. 878. It turns out Blanche is already talking to her father. Then the girl is surprised to ask if her older sister is really pregnant, and then Marquis says that the third blinking prince is a bastard who was just playing with their girl. 879. Then Blanche learned that His Highness had said that even if he didn't know she was pregnant, he couldn't be held responsible for it. And the third prince had said that he would have a ceremony with his bride this spring. 880. Then Blanche asks if the Count knows that her sister is pregnant, but the Marquis says that of course he does not know about it. Suddenly, in the same room enters the culprit herself, who pretends to be happy to see her father. 881. She says she now needs to do her makeup for the wedding, and so asks everyone to come out, except for her sister, who remains unrevealed. 882. Naturally, the maid obeys her mistress's order, but she thinks only that she needs a little time to find both keys to the treasury. But she agrees to wait until her sister is asleep first. 883. Immediately after that, Marietta suddenly touched Blanche's face, grabbed a piece of skin from her face which was supposedly burnt. Immediately after that, the girl looked at that piece of skin with astonishment, while Blanche's face could not hide her astonishment. 884. At this point, the older sister finally guessed that her younger sister was really in front of her, and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. At which point, Blanche was left speechless and just turned away from her sister. 885. Naturally, this did not please her older sister, and she immediately ordered her younger sister to turn back to face her. Then turned Blanche says that her sister knows her character perfectly well, but still continues to tell her. 886. Then the elder sister says that she is just saving her, for the Count's right hand has learned her real identity. Naturally, hearing this, Blanche is very much surprised. 887. But then Marietta told her that she need not worry, for she was very good at hiding her secret, for she was just a maid who looked like a monster. Naturally, hearing this, Blanche immediately asked why her sister was covering for her. 888. And then she hears that the girl wants to ask her for a favor. Then Blanche immediately guessed what her sister wants to ask and asked if she understood correctly that the girl wants to ask her to spend her wedding night with the Count instead of her sister. 889. Hearing that her sister had guessed the request, Marietta was a little angry, but she clarified that it was a good deal for both of them, because she knew where the keys to the treasures of the castle. 890. Hearing these words, Blanche did begin to look more interested. But then her older sister added that if she did what she asked, she would show her where the key. 891. Then Blanche asked her sister after a little thought if it was all right. After all, it was her property and her house. But Marietta said that what she had asked her to do was not so difficult to fulfill, and there was nothing wrong with it. 892. It turns out that for her older sister, avoiding a night with the disgusting Earl is a priority. Then, hearing about it, Blanche smiled and realized that she could accomplish everything as she had planned. 893. While turning away from her sister, Blanche says that if her sister really thinks that way, she will regret it. 894. Right after their conversation, Blanche goes to the dungeon to Ricardo. The guy is naturally very happy to see Blanche, who this time looks completely different and is wearing a more beautiful dress. 895. Ricardo also says that the girl is especially beautiful today, and then Blanche says she knows it, at which point she opens the guy's status window to see how his health. 896. Then she notices that according to his statistics, he is doing much better now than he was before. The girl thinks it's quite fortunate. Then she gives him some bag, and the system gives him a notification that it's her sister's bag of gold coins. 897. Naturally, Ricardo did not know what was in the bag and asked Blanche about it. But the girl did not answer and said they must first get out of here. 898. When the boy heard these words, he was very much surprised and asked if Blanche would go with him. But then the girl said she had something else to do. 899. So she tells him to go back to his hometown first, and right after these words, the girl turns away and walks away. Alcardo is left with his mouth open. 900. But suddenly the guy grabs the girl's hand and asks her not to leave, because he wants them to go back there together. He says whatever she does, he can wait for her. 901. Dear friends, and if you want to see the next part of this story, then be sure to subscribe to the channel and do not forget to click on the bell to not miss the next part, and work on it will begin when this video has 40,000 views or 5,000 likes, because the main thing here is enough.